You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Avar Kriss, and this is episode 535, the first episode of 3 episodes dedicated to The Eye of Darkness by George Mann, which is the first novel in Phase 3 of The High Republic. And with me tonight is Lauren. Lauren, sorry, I didn't mean to pull you off. Lauren, welcome to the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good right before you kicked me off, but no, I'm
Yeah.
doing good. I'm excited to finally talk about this book.
Yeah, and we've been waiting to talk about this one. I think we made the right decision. I mean, we had originally had intended to talk about this earlier, maybe in December, even before like the holidays. But then when we saw that Shadows of Starlight were, going to be out in early January, we thought, why don't we just continue with that, and then we'll kind of pick this up. So we are, I guess, a little bit later than normal, or more than we'd like for this one. But thanks for everybody that's been sticking around. I know there's been a lot of people that have been looking forward to this episode. If this is your first time joining us, because I've had a lot of people have subbed recently, a lot of people have commented, and I think we've got some new folks that are joining us for the first time tonight. Just kind of a heads up. This show, we are going to get into, I don't know that any show honestly gets down into the level of detail that we get. I mean, we're going to go almost chapter by chapter with regards to each of the individual characters that we're going to be talking about tonight. And expect this show to be about an hour and a half, and hopefully not any longer than that. But, historically, we've gone a little bit longer. We've gone up to like 2 hours. So if you need to take a break, get a pillow, take a nap, get some coffee, now's the time to do it, because we're going to be going a little bit longer. So buckle up. Should be a lot of fun. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to all of our Patreon members, especially our now part of the tribe members: Rob, Mike Borda, Lauren, Dante, Riss Bayless, Justin, Jackson, Sharkman Dan, Daz, Isabella, Uncle Leon, Josh C., Jacob, and Reader Reborn. And then also our Delusions of Grandeur members, which are Rod, CJ, Alex, Steven, and Das. If you guys are interested in Patreon, you can head up to cantinacast.com/Patreon and sign up there for as little as $2. We've got a whole back catalog of stuff, including things from Phase 1 and Phase 2. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, take a look at it. Maybe there's something there for you. We'd appreciate the support in any way that you can. And then just kind of a quick plug on what we've got coming up the rest of the week. Jonesy and I are still we're probably going to not do an episode of Patreon this week. We're going to take a break because this one's a little bit longer than normal. We'll be back next Sunday for a Patreon episode. But this Sunday, Ed will be back on the show for a true way station. What I mean by that is we'll go over all the news and rumors. There's been a lot of rumors lately, but we'll do that with the utmost care. News and rumors on Sunday with Ed. That should be a lot of fun to kind of talk about this, because we haven't had a show since the Christmas break, and there's been a lot of stuff that's been building. So super excited about that. Okay, let's get into the book without further ado. I want to make sure that we leave enough time to kind of talk through all of this. And so before we get started on the actual breakdown in regards to the book, I want to say just quickly thank you from myself, Jonesy, and Lauren to the folks at Del Rey. They send us the advanced reader copies and stuff. They allow us to kind of get this stuff out, especially I know you're doing a lot of stuff with Jedi Novel Archive. So thank you to all the fine folks over there. We definitely appreciate all of the ARCs for this and the comic books. But I want to just, and by the way, go buy the book. We're going to break this down. We're going to spoil just about everything that there is to spoil and more. But please support all of everybody that's been behind this book. So whether you're going after the physical copy, digital copy, or even the audiobook, which Mark Thompson does an incredible job, as always. We've talked about him to no end about how amazing he is. Please support this book and go out and purchase it. It is totally worth it. And that's my segue into you. Lauren, I kind of want your opening thoughts. I know you've already done a video on this, but just kind of initial thoughts on what your reading experience was with this going into Phase 3.
Well, I felt like this was an excellent start to the novel side of Phase 3. I thought it was really cool how we had a little bit of a comic prequel with Shadows of Starlight, which kind of just drummed up the hype for this book even more. And then once I got into this book, it just had me so excited to get back into Phase 3 even more. Like, I mean, this book had highs, lows. It had some really awesome moments that made me remember why I love High Republic so much in the first place. So, I mean, this book really had it all.
Yeah, I'd agree. Like, I echo everything. I didn't know what to expect. Like, I enjoyed Phase 2. I thought phase one was much stronger than phase two, and that's no disrespect to the writers or what they were trying to do. Actually, I think phase two is going to age well over time, especially once we get to phase three and we're able to kind of look back and see what was laid down in phase two as kind of all the surprises and Easter eggs and things that played out in phase three. I think phase two is going to age even better than it has been. But I will say, as I was reading this book throughout, it is such an easy read. George Mann does a really good job, and this is very consistent. I think his work is probably consistent is the best word. Very easy to pick up, very easy to follow. He doesn't get too far into the weeds. He stays, gives you enough of what you need, but then that he just keeps things moving. So congratulations to him and his editors, by the way, everybody that was involved in putting this one together. I said this was the most excited I had been, the book that I had enjoyed since Shadow of the Sith from Adam Christopher. So, and there's been a lot of books since then, but I wasn't as excited throughout. I was as excited reading this book as I was going through that experience.
That's saying a lot because I remember how hyped you were for Shadow of the Sith. So for
Yeah.
it to even come close is really saying
Well,
something.
and it feels like, I mean, it almost feels nostalgic in a way because we're picking up with, characters that we left off in phase one 2 years ago now, right? And so to come back to those characters and really it just feels like that momentum was still there. I mean, yeah, we ended kind of on a down note with this, the Fallen Star, but the momentum and the energy and just that kind of the hype that was going around during phase one, this feels just like a natural extension. So to have somebody that wasn't technically part of phase one to be able to come in, wasn't part of the original architects, and kind of just pick up the ball and do that proverbial run with it kind of thing was a great job. So I do appreciate what Mann did with this book, and I really like it. So okay, so we're going to get into the way this is going to work. Is tonight we're going to be talking about Rhil, we'll be talking about Avar, and we're going to talk about Porter. And before we get into the kind of the chronological timeline in which these characters kind of come into play, give me your quick thoughts. I want to know what you felt about Rhil, Avar, and Porter as you were reading this. What were some of the things that stood out for you for the characters? And we'll do a deeper dive, of course, as we get into the book later.
Well, I mean, what really stood out about all three characters is just the growth that we see them go through in this book. And that's saying a lot because this book is just one piece of the bigger High Republic series. But even in this book alone, I feel like we see them all come a long way, particularly Rhil and Avar. Porter, I feel like, I mean, when we see him in this book, he's kind of already, very old and wise. So I don't know how much more he has to learn compared to Avar and Rhil. But I mean, that's really just what stood out to me is seeing them both, and they're both very different types of characters, seeing them try to make the most of the situation that they've been forced in. And then also comparing Porter to them too, just kind of seeing how he's also in a situation where he's having to sort of deal with like the worst of circumstances, and he does it with a lot of skill and mastery too.
Yeah. I mean, 200 years will get you that, I'm sure. But
Right.
yeah, he's a great character. I guess my thoughts on the characters. First off, it was good to see Rhil back. I mean, we hadn't seen her since the Rising Storm. I think we got a mention of in the book here that T9 is gone. I think they were on Barento or Beneto. I forget the name of the planet that they were on where they were captured, but T9's gone. And I'm like, okay, well, where's T9? Like, who's telling that story? We can't just leave that, hanging out there. But I thought, she has a smaller part. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with her and Bellin later, though, right? Since they're now kind of a thing at the end of this book, they're still in the OZ, the occlusion zone. Who's going to pick up that thread? So I really enjoyed both of those characters, and I think they're going to have a really cool dynamic. Avar, I want to go to the chat real quick. Matt Brubeck is with us. He said Avar is my favorite character. She's mine too, man. Look, we even wore my Avar Chris Yoda t-shirt tonight for this show specifically. But yeah, a lot of Avar Kriss. And I think we were pining for that, especially after what we got from the very first book, right? Not Rising Storm. What's the first book called? Jeez.
Light of the Jedi.
Light of the Jedi. I almost said Rise of the Jedi.
Took me a second.
I know.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about that book in forever.
Lots of similar names.
But we were so like, I mean, she was such a foundational character, as they all were. That was more of kind of an ensemble book. But there was something about Avar that we knew was special, and they talked about it. We got to see examples of that. I mean, that's why she got the Hero of Hetzal kind of moniker. And when we left that book, we thought, wow, this is going to be great. And we didn't really get a whole lot until we got to the comic book but I think a lot of us really wanted to see more in the adult novels. And so this book really delivers. I mean, when you do when you compare how much she's in this book to the other characters, it's a pretty substantial amount. It's almost very focused on her, very much focused on Porter, and of course Elzar as well, and Belle. But there is a substantial amount here, more than we had gotten in the other books. But thematically, she's kind of representing the loss and what it means to lose things. There's a lot of fear there. There's a lot of regret, right? And we'll get into that as well, for what she did to Maru, for leaving everybody and running away from her fears, that kind of thing. And she's kind of beaten up and lonely throughout. And so this is a very different Avar. I mean, she's all dressed in black. I've got a picture that we'll pull up here later as a visual. But it's a very transformative kind of book for her, at least a transformative amount of time that happens between the end of At the Fallen Star until now. And that 1 year, a lot has changed for her. So I love that development that's there. And then for Porter, I mean, he's 200 years old at this point. And there was something eerie about the way he was talking about, this is the last of my days. He kept reminiscing about Crichton's son. He was reminiscing about Yoda and all the stuff that had happened. I mean, George Mann was writing this, kind of setting us up to feel like this is it. And Porter says as much, like, I don't have much longer left, right? A lot of the decisions he's making is almost like someone who knows their time is come, or at the very end. And the way it ended with him just being left out there and us not knowing, and then Mann even teasing us saying, well, Avar saying, well, if anybody could have survived, it could be him. All of that is just great, because I don't want Porter Engle to go away. There's so much story still to tell. I mean, you and I have been covering The Blade. We've got the second part of that coming out later this year. We'll cover that as well. But just a great, great character, somebody that we fell in love with, who I thought was really just a soup chef more than anything. But now he turns out to be a lot more than that. So I think all three of those guys were written very well. Anything else before we jump into, and we're going to start with Rhil Dairo, and we'll start with one of the more uplifting chapters of this book.
Oh God. Yeah, let's just jump into it. Let's rip the Band-Aid off of chapter 11.
All right, we're going to get I'm going to pull up this visual. Now, the visuals are not meant for anything other than just to kind of give you something to look at. I was going to do something where, every chapter we talked about it, and it just really wasn't good. It was too much. So, I thought we'd pull up some of this stuff later, or throughout the course of the discussion. So we open up on the Gaze Electric, and I just want to throw this up because I don't think a lot of people have seen this. I'm going to skip over a couple of these slides. We'll come back to those here in a second. But this is the Gaze Electric for anybody that hasn't seen. That's the bottom of the ship. And then there's another visual that came out in the comic books where you can kind of see the top. Again, this has already been out for a while now, but I think for a lot of folks seeing it for the first time, you're like, whoa, this is not what I thought. Or maybe it was. I mean, you can kind of see the front end. It's bulbous and of sorts. So you kind of got that imagery. But nonetheless, we open up in the Gaze Electric.
I always forget how large that thing is.
It is huge, right? And it's talked about in great length when we get during phase 2, which I love that they carried that over, and we got to see the origin and that first initial launch of the Gaze Electric during phase 2. That was really cool. But we start with on the Gaze Electric, we're behind the occlusion zone. So, right. So as a reminder, the storm wall is up. Nihil have kind of created their own little mini galaxy, if you will, and they're kind of in charge of it. We've got some Jedi that are behind that. A lot of people are behind it. There's no way to get through the occlusion zone. If you try to hyperspace through it, you blow up on impact, right? There's no way to get through unless you have a path drive. And the only other way would be just to do sublight speed. But the distance is so far that it would take hundreds of years for you to actually get to any one of the stars or planets in the occlusion zone from where the Republic is right now. So they really have kind of carved out almost literally their own place in space. And we open with Rhil, and she's kind of being shoved in the back by this Talpini named Petrick. He is literally a thorn in her side the rest of this novel. And what she's done, Rhil, she used to be the spokesperson of the Republic, broadcasting all the Lena So stuff, and again, just speaking on behalf of the Republic on television. On Holo, and now Marchion Ro is using her to propagate a lot of his propaganda. There's something perverse about that. He's picked her exclusively because now he's kind of tainted that, and people see the messages coming from her, who was once that spokesperson for the Republic in a way. And we're at a point right now, we're open up where Marchion Ro is wanting to celebrate, right? He walks in, she's very intimidated by him. She knows she's about to do some kind of a broadcast. And Ro tells everybody there, the Nihil, if they're ready for the celebration. He tells her he needs to get on the air, and tonight that she's not going to be just broadcasting to the folks with the inclusion zone in the Nihil space, but she's actually going to be talking to everybody in the galaxy. And if that wasn't enough, right, she was going to be using the channel, the Starlight Beacon frequency, which again is another perverse thing. I just love how crazy this dude is and how he uses this stuff for his propaganda.
He definitely loves his symbolism, that's for sure.
Yes, and the anti-symbolism, things that we'll see more here in just a bit. But yeah, so we're 1 year after the fall of Starlight Beacon. Today is the day. Today is the anniversary of the fall of Starlight Beacon. He's claiming, she's going through the whole speech about how the Nihil are free, which we know they're not. There's plenty of examples that we see in this book and the comics if that's not true. That they are somehow something better than the Republic, right? It mirrors a lot of what we know in our own personal history with some of the dictators and fascist governments that have been out there, right? They say a lot of the same things. We're seeing that here. So just an extension of reality. And Marchion Ro eventually comes on and is like, hey, today should be a day of celebration. But because of what the Republic have been doing, instead, I want everybody here to bear witness to a trial of the most heinous of crimes. And then he says, bring in the prisoner. Now, if you followed us, if you were watching the Shadows of Starlight issues, there is a story about Pratre Vitor, who was down. They went down to a planet with Bell and Buryaga, the Nihil, I think it was Shrike, who used the 4-7 lightsaber nullifier, extinguished their lightsabers, and Bell and Buryaga took off, and Vitor stayed there and just used, what was it? I forget the name of the technique he used. But he was eventually captured. Shonju, right? Shonju. He was eventually captured. I've got a picture here. I'll just bring it up of if you haven't seen that, and it's really just him kind of laid out, unfortunately. But this is the image here, the last thing that he sees, and he's absolutely not even able to move. Right? They shot him from a spaceship or one of the ships above there. I think it was actually the cacophony that hit him, but nonetheless, they roll in Pratre Vitor, and he looks really ill. And I'll show you what he looks like here. We'll pull up the normal image of him. What I found really disturbing about this, number one, there's a lot of stuff that's disturbing, first off. But the most disturbing thing was that Marchion Ro had his robes pressed and clean. The rest of him looks filthy, right? He's been living in filth. He's been suffering. He looks extremely ill, has not been fed, has not been eating very well. He's malnourished. And on top of all that, they've shaved off his horns that you can see on the top of his head. So again, there's this, this happened to Loden Greatstorm, right? Where they cut off his leku. Right. This, I don't know. It's really disgusting.
It's
about
like
what he
an
did.
added humiliation on
really
top
is.
of already being subjected to this torture and having fallen so far. They're just trying to rub salt in the wound with things like that.
Yep. And it speaks to Marchion Ro's head and where he's at. Like, and we know this now. I mean, he's pretty much a psychopath, right? But on top of all that, they've cut off his arm, one of his arms at the elbow. They've amputated his arm. And physically he just looks, worse for wear at this point. So Rhil, he comes in, Rhil is scared. She knows who he is. She knows that he's a grandmaster. And the entire time she's thinking, hey, maybe he's got a plan. Maybe something's, he's got something in mind. He wouldn't just allow them to kind of do this. Why would a grandmaster allow somebody to do this to them? And then Rose says that he's going to make an example of them, that he's going to pay for the crimes of the Jedi against the Nihil over the last year. So all the attacks, everything that we saw in Shadows of the Starlight, now Vitor is going to pay the price for all of that. He then calls over to his guards, and they bring in, of course, a Nameless. I think we all know at this point what the Nameless are. This is one of the images I've got up here from Phase 3. And this is, I think it's concept art. So the one that we saw, or at least was described in the book, didn't have like the Cybertronic stuff or any of that stuff on it. But these are the Jedi killers. We know what they do. They take the Force, suck the Force out of Force sensitives and leave them as a husk. And so Vitor, as he gets close, right, again, consistent with what we saw, even the proximity of the Nameless to him starts to make him, scared. And he starts feeling a lot of pain as this thing gets closer. Now, they still have him on a leash. And mind you, this entire thing is being broadcast, right? Let's not forget that. It's being broadcast across the galaxy. Everybody is bearing witness to this, basically, I would say murder, but it's, an assassination. It's murder attempt is really what it is, I guess.
Yeah.
And then Ro throws a lightsaber, right, over, Loden Greatstorm's lightsaber, throws it over to him, and Vitor doesn't take it. Eventually, as the thing starts getting closer and closer, he starts saying no, 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 over and over again. They bring the Nameless even closer. Eventually, he picks up the lightsaber and starts swinging it around. You know, at this point, we know what's happening in his head because he's got all this fear has overcome him. You know, they have visions that are not even there. I mean, they're kind of in their own space, so there's no chance that he's going to even hit this thing. And then eventually, it's let go, and the Nameless jumps on him, pins him down on the ground. The tentacles come out, and then slowly we start to see him turn into nothing. And I've got the quote here. I just want to. And the Nihil are laughing, by the way, the entire time this is happening. They're laughing, and the last moments it says, within moments there was nothing left of the Jedi Grandmaster that had been once Patre Viter, nothing but spilled dust and the vague outline of a body-shaped husk. So similar to what we saw with Loden Greatstorm, and I think I have the image here because it's so beautiful. But this is how I want to just pause there. But as you were reading it, I guess give me your thoughts kind of on the scene and what that experience. I warned you. I think I told you prior. I was like, wait till you get to chapter 11. I'm warning you now. But this was definitely one of the more disturbing moments of all the High Republic. But it's right up there in terms of, as far as I'm concerned, with the rising storm and what Cavan Scott did to Loden Greatstorm.
Yeah, it definitely, I would say the impact that this scene had was right up there. But I mean, a couple things that really stood out to me about this scene are we have Rhil witnessing all of this, and she's witnessing, I mean, just probably easily the most horrific thing she's ever seen. She's surrounded by Nihil. She has no sort of fighting training of any kind, unlike all of our other main characters. I mean, as far as like people with no agency, I mean, she really has hardly any. But something that is really striking about her to me is that throughout all of this, she's trying to be strong, even though she has every reason not to be. And I mean, there's even one part in this scene where she's talking to one of the Nihil, and there's a quote that's like, she's tried to keep her voice from shaking. She tried to look him in the eye. Like, she's trying to be brave, even though she's in an impossible situation. And in this situation, she's seeing one of the strongest Jedi Masters who has now fallen so far. And I feel like it kind of sent a message to her of, this is what we're up against. The strongest people cannot save us. It's really just going to be up to everybody to chip in. And that's it's not a thought that she explicitly has, but one thing that happens in this chapter is she keeps reflecting on how she never thought that she would see him this way.
Yeah.
And seeing him fall so far and like that contrast from how he was to how he is now, that's something that really stays with her. And I feel like her witnessing that, it actually does kind of fuel her decision making that we see later on in the book. So this is really a big moment for her to have to go through this horrible situation.
I agree. And I think one of the things that stood out for me too is, or I guess one of my takeaways from this, and this comes up a little bit later a few times throughout the rest of the book, this public execution, which is really what this was with Viter, as a public execution. Actually, I think it's the first like misstep that Marchion Ro is taking. I don't think he realizes what this did. I mean, in this book, at least, it did kind of strengthened the hearts and the determination for a lot of folks, even though, yes, it was painful to go through. But I think he did himself a disservice by publicly doing. We totally get what he was trying to do. He was trying to send a message and make everybody feel emotional and, display just how powerful he was to be able to take down a Grandmaster. I mean, if they're the Jedi Council and you're looking at this, you're thinking, we have no hope, right? This is just as bad as somebody like Yoda being taken out. And this guy did it even, in a matter of seconds and turned him into dust. It's a very powerful message. But at the same time, once all that initial emotion is gone, what's left is resolve. And especially from the non-Jedi, like we've got theories, and we talked about them in phase 1, I think, phase 1, we talked theories about how do you take down the Nameless. And I think we're getting there now, of course, with some of the storylines that are going in the comic book. But I think this is going to be his first step. I think I think there's enough here now that people can start figuring out, okay, now how do we work around this, right? He's kind of shown his hand in terms of what the process looks like, and everybody can see it. There's just, I don't know, too many eyes as far as I'm concerned. So I do feel like this is going to be the first mistake, and I think this is going to make people, again, more resolved. I want to just quickly before we go to the next chapter, there's a quote in here. I think this is what you were speaking to about Rhil. It said, all Rhil could hope for was that, far from sending others running scared, an act such as this would only help to strengthen the resolve, to drive them to fight back even harder. Rhil had shown the galaxy who the Nihil really were. right? That plays out later down the road for a lot of folks. It is motivating for them. It is fuel for them. He's almost a martyr at this point, if you want to call him that in some regards. So yeah, I think this is not going to be good for him in the long term. All right, let's go to the next chapter. And this is really the only other chapter before she meets up with everybody else in this book. This is chapter 24, and this is Hetzel. We're inside the occlusion zone. She just finished wrapping up another kind of propaganda video. And inside this room, we have Petrick, which we showed earlier, and then Meglar, which Meglar, by the way, I think it's a Velisti. I forget the name of the race. I have a picture here of one. I wasn't supposed to show that one. This is the female form from the Clone Wars. This is the only other time that I couldn't even find an image of this. But this is what Meglar looks like. So Meglar tells Petrick, hey, go take a break, and he leaves. And when those two are alone, we find out that Meglar is actually the informant, or I guess not the informant, but the person that wants to defect against Marchion Ro. And what they've been doing this entire time is they've been recording these propaganda videos, but then Rhil goes afterwards, after they're done recording, she records another video that's more a message to the Jedi. She's trying to reach out to the Jedi that she knows potentially could be in the OZ, and they kind of embed this secret message into the main message. And, we get the sense that this guy, Meglar, he's not doing this for anything else but himself. Like, he could care less about the Jedi. He could care less about the Republic. He's not in this for anything else other than just acknowledging that being in the career path for the Nihil is just about as bad as a career path, under Lord Vader, right? You're going to die at some point. It's just a matter of time, and he wants out, right? This is too much. Is not what he signed up for. Not exactly what he was thinking. And so really his thought here is, if I can partner with somebody like this and they can get a Jedi, the Jedi can help get me out of here and get me back into Republic space where I can kind of go do my own thing. But he is he plays an important part throughout all of this, because he is, again, that person that has betrayed Marchion Ro and is helping Rhil to escape. Anything you want to add to this on this scene or this chapter?
Well, the thing is that I feel like what Rhil is doing in this scene by getting Meglar's help, it's a really good example of doing what you can where you can to help. And this theme comes up a lot in this book, and this is just one example of it. She doesn't have the power to get out of these, having to make these propaganda messages. I mean, it's either do that or get killed. So she's doing what she has to do to survive, but she's also finding purpose and doing something else that she can do to help out. And that is really what, talking about the fear from the chapter that we just discussed before this, she has every reason to feel like this is too dangerous, I can't risk it. But she does it anyway because she knows it's the right thing to do.
Yep. And we'll come back to her again in just a little bit. This is pretty much it. And from here on out, we know that she continues to send these videos out, more propaganda videos. It makes her sick to her stomach. She hates doing it. And the entire time she's doing it, she's also thinking, like, I really hope people understand that they're forcing me to do this and that this isn't me, right? She has a reputation, and that whole reputation is completely changed, which, Avar picks up on, and a few others here in just a little bit. Okay, we're going to move into Avar Kriss's story again, which is probably the meatier of all the stories, and a lot of what's happening the rest of the book definitely revolves around her efforts. For her, we open up. She's now on. We open up with her on a Nihil transport ship. Her thought right now is, hey, if I can do these smaller battles, if I can, take over these transport ships that have grain and food supplies and water or whatever, rations, and get those and disperse them to the people that need it, I'm making a difference, right? I'm being selfless in that regard. I'm fulfilling my duties as a Jedi, rather than going, okay, let me go find Marchion Ro and take him one-on-one, right? That's not what her thought pattern is that. She knows she's outnumbered. She has the Nameless are out there. So she's just trying to get these smaller victories under her belt to kind of feel like she is doing something. And she looks totally different. I'm going to pull up the image here that was shared on StarWars.com. On the left-hand side, we can see her from Phase 1. On the right-hand side, that's Phase 3. Very Return of the Jedi, Luke Skywalker kind of
I
look.
like the right-hand image better, honestly. I feel like it's cooler.
Yeah, I do too. And part
She's
of this
been
is,
through some things at this point.
It is. Part of the blackness or the black is kind of representative of where she is right now. We know that she's not in touch with the light as closely as she's having a problem with her song and really connecting with the Force like she used to. She's not really sure why. I think we get the answer at the very end, which is really disturbing. but and beautiful at the same time.
I
But
was gonna say, I was like, we might have interpreted that differently. I guess we'll get to
it
that.
doesn't bode well for the fate of the galaxy, right? That's all I'm saying. It's great for them, but I don't know so much for the galaxy. But and there's something pragmatic and practical, right? She can't be running around in her Jedi robes like this, right? She's a hot target. So it makes sense that she would kind of blend in and try to hide in the shadows the way she was. And you know, she's feeling the stressors of all of the titles, the hero of Hetzal, you know, Marshal of Starlight Beacon. You know, everybody looks at, and we talked about this. I don't remember if it was you or it was Jonesy and I, but we talked about the impact that a lot of these titles, like Stellan, had as well, right? He became the poster boy for the Jedi, for the Republic after the events from the Rising Storm and how he saved Lena So, carrying her out, in his arms, bloodied and all that. I mean, this stuff really did weigh on that. That's a lot. Those mantles are hard for people that are supposed to be very humble, like the Jedi. And she's dealing with this at this time. She's really dealing with the idea of titles.
Yeah,
Um,
she's having a hard time letting go of it, it seems like she almost doesn't know what to do without the title.
yeah, right. There's something that was attached to her identity. She was comfortable with identity, and now that's been pulled away, and now she's trying to figure out, who am I? Right? What can I really do? Am I really truly the hero of Hetzal? This gets discussed in a lot greater detail here a little bit later as well. So we've got some more on that. But again, just her force connection's broken. I want to read just quickly this one. It says this is about her and how she's interpreting the force right now. The song of the force had become distant and discordant too, as if everything was broken, misaligned. She could feel it there. She could still call on it when she needed, but her connection to the force lacked the harmony and the peace that it had once provided. So it never explicitly explains how or why it's done that. I think for me, I really think it's some combination of the fact that, there's regret, there's doubt, there's the fear of who, of everything that's out there with the Nameless and the Jedi falling. Maybe there's some shame in there as well, especially, with what happened and how she turned away from Starlight Beacon as the Marshal to go chase down Lorna D because she was convinced that was the leader of the Nihil.
And she's blaming herself for doing that. And I think blaming yourself seems to be, at least with some other High Republic characters, blaming yourself is like the quickest way to get completely out of whack.
Yep. Yeah, and you're right. She blames herself for Elzar Mann's death. Had she not done that, had she not left, she still would have been in charge of Starlight Beacon, right? So that should have been her. The one that I think that plays out throughout this novel that is really, it hits me the hardest, and that's Stella Maru, because if you read the High Republic comic and you saw his last moments as he was literally using the Force to hold that portion of Starlight Beacon together, and was doing that just so it would stay whole as it was entering the galaxy or entering into the atmosphere, in her seeing him and having to walk away from that. And of course she came up with a droid from it, which is kind of cool. But that moment was really powerful, and it lives with her. There are several times in this book where she mentions this and talks about how much of it, how much she misses Maru and how much she regrets that she did that, and feels really bad about what had happened. So I think that's really left a lasting stain on her. But all of those things, right? Some combination, and oh yeah, and by the way, Elzar Mann's not here, right? You factor all that in, and you can see where this is the Force isn't singing to her. She's not able to connect to the Force in the way that she used to in the past. Let's see. Sorry, I got ahead of myself here. So the other thing is she, while she's on the ship, she ends up taking out the two Nihil that are there. She puts them into a escape pod, jettisons that out, right? And she's still very much like, oh, we can't kill anyone. We're Jedi. That tune kind of changes by the time we get to the end of the book. She's much more willing to put her lightsaber in the chests of people than she is here. But she didn't want to kill a Jedi because she didn't want to, people to know that there was a Jedi out there and have them on her trail. So she knocked them out, put them into the, I think she force pushed them or something and made them unconscious, put them to a escape pod. They jettisoned. And now she has this ship, and she's now set her sights on, I think it was the Peril system, which she'll come to here in a little bit. But any other thoughts before we move into the next chapter?
I mean, I feel like, and you've kind of already touched on this, but I feel like when we open with this book, she's really at the lowest of the low. So I feel like she's pretty much just primed for going through a transformation throughout this, because she's really, she's doing the best that she can, and she's trying to make the most of the situation, but her heart really isn't in it, and it's just something that's just been really weighing on her.
Yeah. Yeah, it really has been. Matt had a question. Did they make cards for phase 3? I haven't seen any yet. They did make them for phase 1. If you're talking about the collectible cards, nothing for phase 3 that I've seen. I imagine they're going to, because there's a couple different versions out there now of phase 1 cards, so it feels like that's going to happen. And then One Up versus CPU. What's going on? It says, I feel Avar is afraid of not living up to the title. She goes off to be a hero alone, but her special ability is literally about bringing the Jedi together. Yeah, that's true. Like that was a great example of that was in Light of the Jedi, where when she got there, everybody was able to finally just kind of come together, and it made a difference, right? She kind of turned the tide. Everything was kind of resonating through her. She was pulling in everybody and making everybody stronger. So that's what gave her the title of Hero of Hetzal. But yeah, she is kind of that glue that keeps everyone together. And I think we see as much later on, not to jump ahead, but when she comes back after she gets through the storm wall and she walks into the Jedi Temple, everybody is like looking at her like she is the starlet. She is the hero. She is the one person that they feel like is unstoppable, and they look up to her, and she sees this. Everybody's looking at her and she's thinking, wow, but yeah, that's a great point. Hey, Lego Cat 300's with us. And then who's the Jedi from Survivor that's from the High Republic? Oh, I don't know off the top of my head, honestly, on that one, but we'll have to come back to that here in a little bit. Okay, let's see. So we get into, so now that she has a ship, she heads up to the front and she runs into let me see. I'm going to find the picture I've got here, just an Ugnaught, which it looks a lot like Kuil, to be honest. If, I put a picture of him. I couldn't really find one of it, but
he kind of acts like Kuil too.
He does act like Kuil. I love the fact that he even says, I have spoken. Love that he worked that in. George Mann worked that in a few times here. But what we know about him is kind of little, though. He says he was a haulage pilot at some point, or I guess Avar thinks that he is. He was a pilot of some sort at some point. He says that later on in the book, he talks about how he was in the Navy, right? And that got me thinking, like, do Ugnaughts have, like, spaceships and a whole, like, naval, like,
a whole
fleet?
society?
Are they all, like, tiny little, pork-looking ships or something? I don't know. It is interesting. I would imagine they do have something, but yeah, that's who he is. It's quite a bit. And so, he's really questioning, like, who are you? What are you doing here? Kind of thing. Eventually they kind of make peace, and she says, we're going to the pandrol system because that's where she kind of explains what she's trying to do. She's trying to get all of these supplies to these smaller groups that don't have any. And the problem is, and he brings this up, is they can't travel the normal hyperspace routes. If they do, and they don't have the right codes, they're going to get attacked by the Nihil, or, that'd be the worst thing. They get attacked by the Nihil, and they can't use the hyperspace lanes because they don't have the path engines to use that. If they go outside of those established hyperspace lanes, the approved ones by the Nihil, then they run the risk of attracting all kinds of scav droids. And we see a lot of scav droids here in a little bit. Avar says, hey, my droid KC-78 has been working on trying to slice into these things. This plays into a lot of what we see a little bit later. Like that becomes critical that he eventually figures out how to slice into the scav droids. So, and let me go back to the images here. I just want to show some folks some of this stuff here. If you hadn't seen, this is what the scav droids look like. Kind of like crabs. They got the 6 legs. These are the legs that Avar cuts off later when she brings one back in. You can see a picture of KC-78 there on the right-hand side, along with Avar Kriss on the left. And then one of the cool things that I just thought was interesting, and I posted this on Twitter, but Cavan Scott is the creator of, he came up with the concept of KC-78. You can see an image of him right here. This is from the 1978 Cantina adventure set that was released. And I won't get into the whole story. I think you probably know if you're a big Star Wars fan. But this was just a paper background, like a playset that you could put on there. And, Cavan Scott was so enthralled and intrigued by this little droid that he saw, as a young kid or whatever, that this is what he brought back. And so if you didn't know, that little droid there is Liv. And so what I posted was that he lives, Mark Yanro, so eat it, right? This droid lives because he's alive by the time we get to episode 4, which is pretty exciting. So we know he's not going to die.
At least we have that going for us.
At least we have that. It's a small win, but it is a win nonetheless. So yeah, they head out there. They make their way out at that point, and they're going to help some Rhodians, which I think are gross. But okay, anything that you want? I don't like Rodians. You know that. If you
Oh
listen to
my
the show, you know I
goodness.
hate Rodians. I hate their little suction cup fingers. It's the worst
I
thing
have
ever.
that Rhodian baby doll. I
I
bet
know
you would
you do.
hate
You
that.
sent me a text of it, and I thought, geez, why? Who would want that?
I thought it was cute in a weird way.
Um, anything you want to add before we move into the Pandrol system?
The whole thing about Rhodians totally got me off my train of thought. Um, yeah, I mean, she's just at this point, she's really just trying to keep it together, and it kind of seems like she's barely succeeding. But I did love this introduction with Bellin because again, kind of like Rhil, he's someone who has no training. He's in a situation where he has pretty much no power. He has no control over what the Nihil are making him do. He's just trying to survive. But he still is, even though he's kind of grumpy about it at first, he's still willing to help Avar at great personal risk. And so I feel like that's just a really cool kind of addition that in this book we're having, the Jedi characters that are super trained and super good at what they're doing, but then we also have some really good characters that aren't trained that the Jedi wouldn't be able to make it without them, honestly. And I feel
Yeah.
like Bellin is just a really good example of that.
Yeah, it's a good balance, and credit to the architects, the folks that came up with all these characters and continue to flesh out the story. I think they're very conscious of that. I mean, at the core of what Star Wars is, yes, we love the Jedi, we love the lightsabers, we love the hyperspace stuff, but it really is about if you think about it, a lot of the people that made a significant difference in all of the trilogies were the non-force sensitive users. You have to have that healthy balance. And I think right now, again, not to one of the speculation things we said is maybe they do put together some kind of elite task force that has been, maybe trained by the Jedi or has, special equipment and weapons. And those are the folks that go after the Nameless, where the Jedi stay back, right? They have to kind of give in to that. And I think it's a very interesting concept, given that the Jedi are the ones that are always in front. But it would be kind of cool to have a role reversal where suddenly the Republic are like, no, we got this. We'll take care of you now until we get the Nameless out, and then you guys can step in. That was just one of the theories we threw out there. I just want to throw the other one out there that I think that we had one of the more prevalent theories that we kind of banged out, and that was, could the Jedi somehow suppress their Force abilities, right? It feels like the Nameless feed off of the Force abilities. What if they could suppress it, similar to what Luke Skywalker did in The Last Jedi? He cut himself off from the Force. I don't know. Does that extend to the Nameless? Can they feel that? Can they take that away? It would remove them of their powers, right? So the danger, they've got different dangers. They don't have all the abilities that come with being Force sensitive, but it's at least would allow them to, put on a blaster, put on some armor. Maybe this is where we get the Clone Wars armor. I don't know. It'd be kind of cool to see some of that stuff play out here. I am very intrigued to understand how eventually they overtake the Nameless, and again, not taking anything away from the storyline that's happening in the comics, because that is definitely, they've got something brewing there as well. So they get to the Pandrol system. They're suddenly swarmed by scav droids. Avar takes the controls and she flies into this debris zone that's still right outside the solar, not the system, but outside of the main system there on Pandrol. And she's doing these incredible feats, right? And we're not going to get into all the details of all the maneuvers and things she pulls off, but it's enough that Bellin is like, wow, this is incredible. Like, I've never seen it. I mean, he's so impressed with what she's able to do and how many droids she's able to kind of scrape off as they were kind of swarming. It was very stressful too. Like, she, not only had she done that to get them all off, they then come into the atmosphere, and she knows that they're going to try to head to the atmosphere. She knows they're just going to keep coming. And so her thought is, well, I need to get at least one of these droids so that KC-78 can get in there, slice it, reprogram their attack protocols or whatever it is she talks about. And so she heads right back out. And Bellin's like, where are you going? She's like, I'm going back outside. I've got more work to do. She knows she's got to get one of these droids to kind of pull in. And she goes to this whole battle where she's fighting these things. And it's, again, really intricate in terms of what she's doing. She eventually cuts off the front legs on one of the scav droids and then kind of pulls it back into the hull so that KC-78 can work on. And the entire time she's fighting these, like, she really is enjoying it. Like, she's starting to feel alive again. She feels like she's defending people again at that same kind of level, even though she's, not as connected with the Force like we talked about. There was something kind of, really cool and special that she really enjoyed. I mean, and you got to imagine this thing's just raining scav droids. They continuing just to build and build and build. And there's so many of them. And this takes a toll on the ship just a little bit later.
She seems to thrive in the action. Like, there's a big contrast between her trying to fight off all these droids versus her in hiding trying to plan what to do. Like her attitude is just different.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something. Yeah, she's almost. Yeah, she's energized by the idea that she is kind of that last hope. I mean, she almost kind of relishes in that, and as we saw with on Hetzal and other examples. But yeah, she got her mojo back at least from in this moment where she was needed most, because it did feel like, wow, this is overwhelming. I mean, it was a swarm. They were overwhelming them at one point until she finally took matters into her own hands. Um, so they finally reach the Pandrol system. They land. They meet up with the two people that are kind of running the colony. Mind you, the entire colony is completely like burned down. It's all ash and charred and everything else. There's a married couple. There's two females named Mila and Buna. They're kind of like the leaders, de facto leaders now of this, what's left of the colony. And what we find out is because they didn't pay their tribute 2 months ago, the Nihil came back, and so, by the way, sorry. So the Nihil are asking tributes from these colonies within Nihil space. So yes, it's the propaganda of everybody's free, but only if you pay your tributes, only if you pay your taxes, right? And they come around and not only they're taking their stuff, but we learn from these guys here that they've taken the Rhodian babies as well, right? They pillage their towns when they don't pay their tributes, and then they take the kids. Where they're taking the kids, I don't know. But I thought that was pretty disturbing as well. So it's not just, you pay a small crime. I mean, they're literally killing and driving people out, which is not going to scale. I think you and I talked about this, and I think this is where Gira Star Wars comes in. We'll talk about her in another episode. But this is where Gira Star Wars is coming from. Like, you can't do this. This is not sustainable. You can't sit here and constantly kill and pillage everybody in your galaxy, because eventually either they're going to rise up against you or you're not going to have anybody left. I don't think Mark Ro cares, but that's a whole nother story for another time. But your thoughts, I guess, on Pandrol here as they learn more about what's happening.
Well, even if he doesn't care, I mean, he's going to have to, because eventually they're going to overpower him if he doesn't actually try to get a handle on things like that. So, yeah. And I mean, just the fact that it's also kind of like, what do you want to do? Like, be the king of the ashes? Because if they're just destroying all of these places, aside from the fact that these people are eventually going to rise up, I mean, even just ignore that for a second. You're destroying all of your land and your territory yourself. Like, what is the point of all of this trouble if you're just going to destroy all of it? Because we also find out that what happens on Prandril is not unique.
Yeah.
And they're doing this to lots of other places, and they have done it to lots of other places. They're continuing to do it. So it's just kind of like, what's the point of all of this anyway?
Yeah. There is something that's interesting too. Like, she gets there, and I guess she's expecting them to be like, oh my gosh, you're our savior. You brought us grain. And they're like, yeah, this is great, but it's only going to last us 2 weeks. And after that, what do we do? And it's such a shock to her. It's such a slap in the face, because she realizes at that point, this is kind of the turning point for her. I think one of the turning points, or one of the things that kind of gets her to turn to where we see her at the very end, and who she wants to be going into the next book, or wherever at the end of this book. But she does realize that she's been fooling herself. Like, yes, she feels better that she's out here doing these small victories, but they don't last. There's nothing lasting about them. And as a Jedi, right, almost not necessarily living up to the titles so much, but just her role as a Jedi, she should be doing more. And I think at this point she acknowledges, I should be doing more. I can't just be doing this, right? She's the quote says, she'd been playing it safe, acting as a loner, chalking up each tiny victory as her justification for continuing to avoid her real responsibilities. But if she was going to make any real difference at all, she was going to have to make some noise. In other words, she starts to realize, okay, I've got to do more than this, right? I can't just keep doing these small victories. This is great for me, but it's not really great for all of them. And it's Belen who does the most for her in this point, because I think he says, you can't save them all, right? This is on the Nihil, not you. You didn't do this. You did something good today, even though, yes, they're only going to last for 2 weeks. I'm paraphrasing her, but he says, you did something really good today. You brought food to starving people. You reminded them that they're not alone in the galaxy. It is enough. And then he says, I have spoken, which I thought was really cool. But that was really what she needed. And then she walks off, I think, and she kind of breaks down and starts crying, because I think she's starting to realize that she's been putting all this pressure on her, thinking that she had to do something really big, or that she couldn't. And I think she's starting to realize that, yeah, she does. And people are seeing her for what she is doing. Right.
I have a question for you though. Like, when she's saying all this stuff about, oh, I I need to stop fooling myself. I haven't been doing enough. Do you think that she's being too hard on herself, or do you think that she's actually onto something? Because when she's saying that, I kind of was thinking to myself, like, well, you're stuck in this situation. You can't be the hero of Hetzal right now. You like should learn how to be at peace with not being the hero of Hetzal and like learn to like use your skills elsewhere. But I mean, I don't know. Like, do you think that it sounds like she actually I isn't doing enough by trying to help these people? Or I don't know. What's your thoughts
Yeah,
on
I mean,
that? Because I was
it's
kind of going
hard.
back and forth.
I'm with you. I go back and forth too. Like, I get what she's doing, and does it make a difference in the lives of these one or two people or these small groups of people? Absolutely, I think it does. Is it something is it lasting though? Right? That's kind of what that's kind of what I think she's starting to realize is that I'm taking these small victories, but they're not amounting to anything. I'm just keeping people alive, right? She's triaging things, and she's not going after the systemic issue that exists. And if there's any one person that can do that, it's got to be her. And I think that's cool. That's what Bellin is trying to tell her, right? You're doing everything that you can, and she gets as much like I don't think she's been pushed over to the edge to where it finally clicks. But when she finally meets up with Porter and he starts talking to her, I think that is that last piece that she needs to build her confidence and to say, okay, yes, I can do this. And I should be doing this, right? I should be doing more. I have to put myself out there. And I think part of it is the comfort of having and knowing that somebody like Porter Engle, of all people, is still in the OZ. I mean, that's a really boost to your confidence. And I think that kind of changes for her and why we see her do what she does a little bit later. So I don't know if I skirted around that enough, but that's my answer on that one.
It's a complicated
It
question
is.
with a complicated answer.
Um, and so she goes off and she wants to kind of be alone. And this is where, there's a message playing, there's a propaganda message playing, and Casey hears it and plays it back for Avar. And she realizes through that hidden message that there are other Jedi behind the OZ. She tells him that she hears the message and says that that Rhil is being forced to by road to send the propaganda messages. She says that she found a way to put these secret messages in there, and says that if there's anybody that she's had, getting help from a defector, which is, Melgar, we talked about here a little bit. And then she gives the coordinates in this message to Hetzal, of all places, to Hetzal, as where she wants any Jedi within the sound of her voice to head out to kind of rendezvous with her, because they've got a plan, right? They've got a plan that they want to execute, and they need the help of a Jedi. And that's kind of how that chapter ends, which is pivotal, right? So we go into chapter 29. Avar tells Bellin that this is the plan. This is where she's going. And she basically, she tries to tell him, like, I'm going to do this by myself. And he says, no, my ship, my rules. I have spoken. I'm coming with you. And Bellin, again, he has another I have the quote here, but he does another great job of really getting through to Avar and Avar acknowledging who she really, really is. I think, again, like we said at the very beginning, she's kind of lost herself in a lot of ways. But Bellin says, if I go and get myself killed, it's my business, isn't it? Don't you see that? You may be a Jedi, but you don't have to save everyone. You can't save everyone. It's the fact that you even try that makes you different from the Nihil. You don't have to win, Avar Chris. All you have to do is try. That's all. That's enough. And that's very humbling for her to hear that, right? On that all she does is have to try. And I just want to continue the quote here because she breaks down crying when she hears this. Somewhere down the line, she had forgotten that. She decided that even if she couldn't live up to who she thought she had been, who she thought she had to be, then she could be someone else, right? This transformation, being somebody else now. Circumstances are different. She has to evolve and adapt to the situation. I think that's where she was kind of stuck in a lot of this. But she could be somebody else, just Avar. But that wasn't true. It had never been true. And now a small Ugnaught pilot had held up a mirror, had reminded her who she really was, someone who had tried. So that's exactly what she was going to do, right? At this point, she's just going to give it her try.
Well, and I feel like the fact that anybody could say this to her, and I don't think it would hit the same as it hits when Bellin says it, because he has caught her off guard multiple times at this point by his willingness to put himself at risk and to help and and he was just dragged into this situation. He didn't sign up for it or anything,
Yeah,
but he
right.
still has had, a lot of willingness to help her do what is needed. And so I feel like the fact that he keeps catching her off guard and surprising her with his willingness to do that, the fact that he is the one saying this, I feel like it gives it that much more impact because he's actually living out what he's saying and kind of setting an example for her.
Right. I mean, he doesn't have any skin in the game, really. Honestly, if you think about it, if he doesn't have to stay there, she's offered for him to leave several times. At the same time, she's inspiring him, which is inspiring her, and that's what's kind of keeping them together. So, and through that, we get a really great relationship that we're not going to really get into too much here tonight. But I do really like, again, this character of Bella, and that's why I said at the very beginning, I really want to see what happens with him and Rhil now that they're still stuck behind in the OZ, but they're free from the Nihil, at least. Okay, so they go to Hetzal. I'm going to pull up this image again. I thought this was funny. I was trying to find an image of Hetzal, and for whatever reason, this was the only one that came up. I didn't make this. I promise you I did not make this. It's The Sound of Music, only it's called The Hero Hetzal.
My gosh.
I don't know why it's just hilarious. But they head back to Hetzal, which is where Marchion Ro's main base is. Again, the symbolism, right? He knows this was a big shiny moment, a proud moment for the Jedi, for the Republic. What better place to set up camp and make, this his main operations? And he's got a castle that he lives out of here as well. But they get to Hetzal. I was gonna say, yeah, we had the quote. We don't need to talk about that. It was just about what Marchion Ro was thinking. I want to ask you one quick thing: the tower and the eye and the lightsaber. What does that remind you of?
What, the Eye of Sauron?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so obvious. It's on the nose.
Oh, yeah.
I
It's
loved it.
definitely a reference, which I always appreciate and love.
Yes, me too. But I mean, it's so in your face. I don't know how anybody could have not seen it.
Yeah. And the way it's described in the book, too, it's very clear that that's what that is inspired by, which I love.
But Bellin is they come into the atmosphere. Bellin is flying at this point. He ends up cutting the engines and sends a ship into like this downward spiral. They're coming. I mean, it's scary as all can get out. I mean, even Avar is completely frightened by the fact that this guy has cut the engines, and he's done this because one, it's harder for them to be hit, and because the engines aren't on, they can't be detected as well. Of course, he pulls everybody out. Everybody's crapped their pants at that point, but he pulls up at the last minute, and then he lands a ship. Avar gets out, and she's going to head to the rally point, or the rendezvous point. Bellin says he wants to go with her, and Avar says, no, I need you and Casey to stay with the ship, because if I don't make this out, if this is a trap, which very likely could be, you guys need to get away. And so, she denies them, doesn't allow them to head up to the top of the ridge where she needs to meet up with him. At that point, when she gets to the very top there, Rhil and Meglar show up on a speeder bike, and so they pull in. They do their greetings. I mean, Rhil is completely floored that of all the people that showed up, it just happened to be Avar Kriss that heard her message, right? It's got to be a sign from the Force itself that, the hero of Hetzal would show up.
It's a sign she was doing the right thing by putting herself at risk like that.
Yeah, right. You could chalk it up to the will of the Force if you wanted to, right? That this just happened. Serendipitous of sorts, but certainly, it certainly boosts her confidence. I mean, it definitely gives Rhil hope. Which is another thematically, the idea of hope and where hope comes from throughout this book is really kind of cool. It's very inspirational. And we've already talked about some really good examples of, the relationship between Bellin and Avar, but throughout this, especially when we get into Elzar and into Bell, and how hopeful they continue to be that they're going to be able to break through the wall and all that. It's just thematically, it resonates throughout the entire book. And so they meet up. And Melgar's plan basically said, he says, okay, yeah, I'm the defector. I want out of this. I mean, he's very clear and very candid. Like, I really don't want anything to do with you. I don't want anything to do with the Republic. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for me, kind of thing. But his idea, he'd just been assigned to Melis Shrike and her crew, right, on the Cacophony. And the idea is that they're going to sneak Avar onto that ship. She'll take over the ship, and now they've got a ship that's well armed. It's an incredible ship, by the way. Well, not at the very end of this book, but it's a really cool ship because it shows up in the comics, and we've seen it at other places. But they will actually have a ship that has a path drive on that, and that'll be their ticket out of the OZ back into Republic space. And then the last thing Rhil says to Avar, she says, "I have faith," said Rhil. "I couldn't have dared to hope that you would be the one to answer my call, Avar, the hero of Hetzal, again." And it's the title right back again. She's hearing it all over again. The people that see her for this, and so that I think that does put additional pressure on her. But she's in a better headspace at this point.
Well, she seems to like it when people call. I mean, it's like it's pressure when people call her the hero of Hetzal, but it also seems like she kind of wants it too, which I feel like that might be kind of dangerous down the line, that she has this sort of attachment to the glory that she's had in the past.
Yes, yeah. That you're spot on. There's a lot of attachments that are happening here, and we'll talk about Porter Ingle's role in this because I've got questions about Porter Ingle's his why he does some of the things he does here later with Avar. Okay, this will be the last chapter we'll talk about before we switch over to Porter Ingle, and then we'll kind of bring everything together. But Bella and Avar, they're kind of watching the most recent message by Markion Ro. And Markion Ro, we're catching up now with the Patre Vitor, public assassination. But he also talks about he's now giving so let me back up. What's happened is the Republic have tried to go and breach through the storm wall, and they fail. And so the propaganda machine is out now. So Rhil is talking about how the Republic had launched an unprovoked attack. There, not a single shot was fired by the Nihil, and all of the Republic forces all died horribly. And now, in response to all that, and this is what really shocked me, it totally floored, was not expecting this. Markion Ro's response is he's now going to expand the storm wall. And so he expands it across 2.5 sectors, right? He takes over the Danger, the Mayagil, and I'm probably saying these wrong, and the Seswana sector, which ends up kind of being cut in half. But sectors are massive, folks. Like, I don't know if you know, but they're huge. They're huge amounts of space. But I had never
That's
considered
multiple planets that we're talking about.
multiple planets. I mean, these are solar.
Yeah.
I mean, these are sectors, so they may have solar systems within themselves, right? So it's not just, oh, we got 10 more. It's like, no, they've got hundreds of more, which is a problem in itself. Which I think is Gira Star Wars we'll see that a little bit later when because he's growing and still doesn't have like the infrastructure in place and is really kind of going about this just off the seat of his pants kind of thing. So but yeah, he expands the storm wall. So it's just crazy to think the storm wall could expand, and just how far could they expand? Could they try to expand it all the way into something like Coruscant, right, later down the road or whatever? But it just makes your mind wonder. And then that certainly doubts. I think Avar suddenly has a sense of doubt again. It kind of seeps in, and this is reoccurring. There's she gets really confident about things, and then something happens, sets her back, and she's kind of reeling for a little bit. And I think this
Takes
is the
the
one where
wind
she's
out
not-
of her sails.
It does. It does. It absolutely does. But then at that point, she kind of remembers Stellan words. There's a quote in there from the Fallen Star where he's talking about how she believes in him, or he believes in her. Sorry. And that, he said that, she's better than all of them. Without her, they lose, right? All of this stuff really helps her to kind of pull her back up from the ground. And then Avar tells Belen that nothing changes, right, as far as the plan goes, because they're free. I mean, Belen's like, what are we going to do now? This is the storm wall's much larger. What should we do? And she's like, we stay the course. Nothing changes as far as concerned. They just have to go further now to get outside of the storm wall. But yeah, she says they're going to meet up with Melgar and Rhil at the next sunset. Anything else you want to add? And we're going to swing into Porter Ingle now.
Well, I mean, I just keep thinking about you said something a second ago about how she's remembering what Stellan said about they can't do it without you. That whole perspective, I mean, I hate to say it, but I wonder if this is going to get Avar in trouble at some point, maybe down the line, because it kind of seems like when she's feeling at her lowest, the thing that seems like it's making her feel better is when she's remembering when someone told her how amazing she was, or when someone else calls her the hero of Hetzal, or something like that. And it makes me wonder if if she's not really in touch with kind of like when she's reflecting on what it means to be just Avar. It kind of feels like she still hasn't really fully grasped that yet. And that's kind of like a lesson that she's still in the process of learning.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And I think some of this it's making it more difficult for her to kind of grasp who she is, who she needs to be, because these events just keep changing. And she is alone, like throughout this until she meets up with Porter. Even there was a moment in there during the comic, during Shadows of Starlight, where Elzar had connected with her. What was it? What was the name of that cockamania system
The
that he used?
Tithonic resonator.
Tithonic resonator, right? Got to remember that one. But yeah, he used that Tythonic resonator to contact her, and it was just his. I think he said Avar. I mean, she heard his voice, and that was enough, and that kind of fueled her. But you're right. There's a lot going on here that's kind of an ebb and flow for, it's two steps forward, one step back, and vice versa. So none of that really helps. I mean, she's very, I wouldn't say volatile, but she has a lot of mixed feelings and emotions throughout this book until the very end, I think, about who she is. And it really is kind of playing with her. And some of this kind of seeps into, potentially leading to, I'd say, the dark side, but, giving into the attachments, giving into the fear. We see a lot of that happening with all of the Jedi during this phase. So this all is going to play out, I'm sure, when we get to the rest of phase 3. And then, of course, when we get to Acolyte. So
I do feel like as far as light versus dark, she does still seem very much in the light to
yeah,
me. Like if I had to choose like which one of these characters is going to go to the dark side, I don't think it would be Avar, but it's just the attachment to the glory. I feel like might get her in trouble in some kind of a way. It might not be in a dark side way, but I'm just kind of bracing myself for that.
yeah. I mean, it speaks to the hubris that Skywalker was talking about in The Last Jedi as well, right? Some of the arrogance that came in.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. So yeah, red flags, man, everywhere. All right, let's talk about Porter Engle. I'll pull up the image of, I think we've kind of looked at it right now. So on the left-hand side, that's him in phase 1. That's him on phase 3. So again, he's gone with the darker look. Still got the patch. I don't know. If you're Porter Engle, I don't think he can hide. He's so distinct looking.
He's kind of obvious. That hat, that silly hat kind of doesn't help though.
Yeah. I'm not the biggest fan of the hat, but he is such an incredible character. He's so awesome. But we open up with him on Datus. He's inside the occlusion zone again, one of 2 Jedi that we're aware of that were stuck behind the inclusion zone. And, he's campsite. He arrived there about 2 days ago at this point. He's inside the Bentora system. And he's at a place where he had visited years ago with Creighton Sun. And Creighton Sun was a prominent character during phase 2 of the High Republic. We won't get into much about him, although it does come up here a little bit later as he's reminiscing about some of the adventures that him and Creighton Sun went on. But Porter feels like he's obligated. He feels like it's his obligation to stay behind and stay in the OZ to help those that can't help themselves against the Nihil. And just, he can't abandon them, right? This is just who he is. He's going about this a little bit differently than Avar Kriss, right? He's not trying to make big waves as well, but I don't think he's not afraid to make the big sacrifice. He's not afraid to take the big chances. He's just more calculated about it. He's doing things. He's working towards it. He's got got plans in action, if you will. But yeah, Porter's idea is, it's been months in the making, and what he's doing is he remembers at one point long ago that there used to be things called EX droids. And in short, these EX droids were able to kind of travel through space, but they didn't operate on the same hyperspace. I'm going to call it signals, for lack of a better term. I forget what the term was that George Mann uses, but they don't operate and travel through hyperspace as hyperspace drives do today. And so his theory is that if he can find the components for these old EX droids, and he's been going around all over the Nihil space looking for remnants of this stuff. So it's been a quite a task and an undertaking to find all this stuff.
Yeah.
Big project, yeah, is it definitely. But yeah, these droids that once were used for Pathfinders to relay communications, he's thinking that if he can get one of those, he can put a message on there and then send that through the storm wall, because the storm wall is not going to, call it, filter out that particular type of technology, right? That type of signal that it uses to travel. So it all makes sense, right? I saw this as almost as a kind of form of telegraph, if you will, like to compare it to like modern day stuff. The way they would do this is they would load it up with the message and then send it out, and then it would get to a relay, and that would relay that kind of thing, and then eventually it would come back. So,
and it's short hyperspace jumps too, which is the main difference that he feels like. He does admit it's a long shot. He's like, it's a long shot, but it's at least worth a try. That because of the short jumps, there's a chance that it might be able to get past the storm wall. It might not recognize it the way that it would recognize a ship.
Yes. Yeah, great point. The short hyperspace jumps play into this later here. The other thing that I found interesting about Porter Engle before we move on, it was interesting that he actually credits Elzar Mann for being kind of an inspiration for him, right? He actually gives Elzar Mann credit for thinking outside the box, and he brings him. He like mentions him a few times. So I kind of want, well, I don't know if we'll ever get to see that now, but I do like the fact that, so Elzar Mann, like of all people, is not somebody who thinks that people look up to him, right? I mean, it's like quite the opposite. You know, he thinks
Poor
everybody hates
Elzar.
him. Right. He's so like, you know, Eeyore of the High Republic. And yet you've got somebody like Porter Engle, who's arguably one of the best, greatest Jedi during this time frame, going, yeah, this kid inspired me, right? His ability to kind of think outside the box and go against the grain, be the maverick at times. These are traits that I'm looking to in order to get me out of the situation that I'm in right now. So it's sad that he may never hear that. And I don't remember if he actually says as much to Avar so that Avar could pass it on to Elzar maybe sometime down the road. But yeah, it's unfortunate that he'll never know that. So anyways, he intercepts the, he finds out that Avar Kriss is behind the occlusion zone as well. He knew that she was out there, but he didn't want to go try to seek her out. He felt like it would be safer if they just stay separated. Them together probably wouldn't bode well. They'd be hunted as such. And so he's purposely not trying to do that. And he's kind of going down his own path of trying to get these EX droids, and try to relay that message out to them.
He also seems more at peace with his solitude than Avar is. Like, he's just kind of trying to make the best of it. He's undertaking a big project that he's very focused on. His attitude is kind of more like, well, this is what I have to do right now, and this is the situation I'm in. Like, he doesn't seem so unbalanced like Avar is. So it's just like an interesting contrast between the two of them.
Yeah. He's also, so he goes to the crash site, and there's a whole story in there that we won't get into where him and Creighton's son had kind of crashed this ship there long ago. They fought off a bunch of people, yada, yada, really cool stuff. But he knows that there was an EX droid on that ship. He eventually finds it, and the entire time he realizes that while he's getting closer to the ship, he's actually being tracked by 5 Nihil, one of which is an Umbaran, which are really cool. I love that the Umbarans are a really cool group that showed up in the Clone Wars. But this group has been tracking him this entire time. And then he eventually gets into the ship. He says that if they knew that he was a Jedi, right, he's trying to hide the fact that he's a Jedi. So he's not pulling out his lightsaber. He's not trying to defend him that way. Because if he does, he knows that General Weiss, who we're going to talk about here in just a little bit in greater detail, is going to be there right immediately, right? I think they call that we covered General Weiss, you and I did, during the Blade comic series. So we know the history that's there. And I think let me pull that image up too. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, there was also something that was interesting too, that when he's thinking about what to do about these Nihil that are tracking him, he does have a moment where he's like, I could just go over to their camp in the dead of night and just finish them all off, and it would be so easy. But it's not the Jedi way to do it that way. And that goes just against, if he was to do that, that would go against the way that Porter usually deals with people. He really tries to not use violence unless he absolutely has to. He really tries to stick to the Jedi way. So even though it would be safer for him to just go sneak up on these people and surprise attack them and just take care of it, he stops himself from doing that because it's important to him to remain true to his principles.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Porter Engle right throughout. I mean, he's very constant in that regard. We see that in everything he's been in so far. Some of that is his sister Barash as well, but there's lots of good examples of that. Nicholas Kent just chimed in and said, yeah, it was like a carrier pigeon droid. So kind of going back to talking about the way the EX droids.
I love all these
worked.
male metaphors.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's not the first time
Telegram,
like
Pony
we had
Express, carrier pigeon.
I like the fact that they're kind of real world things, almost like similar to the parachute. I mean, that was literally a parachute during the Fallen Star, but when they bring in that old stuff like that, it is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's fun. So I've got a picture up here of General Weiss. If anybody didn't know what she looks like, she's a Maryland. She's got Beskar armor, which makes her a formidable opponent, especially for somebody like, this is the crazy thing about her. Like, I love this character so much because they've been fighting for almost 100 years now. I think I forget the time, the length of time that these two have been fighting, but they're pretty. She does well in a fight against, of all people, the Blade of Bordata, right? Against somebody like Porter Engle. Says a lot about how incredibly badass she is. But you got an image here of her. so Porter eventually says that, there's only a matter of time before they catch up with him. And I want to read this quote just really quickly, because earlier I talked about how he was, there's things that he says and things that he does that you feel like his time is coming, and he knows that his time is coming. And this is one of them. He says, Porter knew she was going to catch up with him eventually. He was still a Jedi, but he was old. He didn't want to keep running forever. It wasn't what Jedi were supposed to do. At some point, he'd make his stand, see it through, look his old enemy in the eye. And of course, this is foreshadowing, because this is exactly what happens at the very end of the book. He kind of does have his final stand, his last stand against her. He heads into the shuttle. He finds the EX droid that he's been looking for, the components that he needs. And it's then that he realizes that he's surrounded by those 5 Nihil. They finally caught up with him. They tracked him down. He kind of gives them a chance to kind of lower their weapons. He's inside. They're trying to call him out and say, surrender kind of thing. I think he eventually like blows off the side of the ship with the force. Then he cuts, he deflects one bolt back, it hits one of the Nihil in the forehead. That kills him. He does an Elzar Mann special and cuts one of the Nihil in half.
Oh no.
Long ways. Long ways, I guess. I don't know. He uses the force, throws one to the ground. Yeah, it's gruesome either way. He uses the force, chucks the third one out, and then the fourth one, he impales with the lightsaber. He throws it and impales it in its chest. The only one that's left is the Umbaran, who's like, the Billy Badass of this group. And eventually the Umbaran catches up with them, and eventually pulls out the lightsaber that was in the chest of the one that he impaled, and uses the force, like telekinesis, to throw it back and kills that last Umbaran Jedi. And so he puts them all down. And before he heads out, he even says, "I'm really sorry." Like, he does not, and we know this is, again, very consistent for Porter Engle. He's not somebody that wants to get into a fight. We know many of the Jedi during this time are really not about, they don't want to kill people unless they have to. I think that tune's going to change as things get worse for them.
Well, the thing I appreciate about Porter is that when the time actually comes, he will kill people if he has to. He tries not to, but if it becomes clear that this is what you need to do for the greater good, for the mission, for your own life, then he is willing to do it, which I feel like I really appreciate that about him.
Yeah. Matt's got to leave. I'm going to put my answer in here. He said, "Evening, got to bow out. I still ask, who is your bet to off-row?" And I've said this since phase 1. I said it during the Rising Storm, in our coverage of the Rising Storm, but I said it's Bel Zettifar. And so far, I think there's enough there to think that I'm not wrong. I mean, it could be a lot of people, honestly, and there could be a lot of different ways, and I'd be happy with all those ways. But there's just something about Bel getting justice for what, and we see it in this book. Like, he is determined, so focused on vengeance or revenge, however you want to talk about revenge or justice, whatever, is in his mind. But there's something poetic about the last person that gets the last laugh, last lick on somebody marking on row, is someone who was robbed of just about everything. And I go back to the passage of everything that happened in the Rising Storm, and just that relationship that we have with Lodin that we saw later on in books. I just want it to be him because I think he needs that, and I love Bel Zettifar, but I wouldn't hate it if they went a couple of different other ways as well. Do you want to just throw something out there now to kind of put the bets down?
I mean, I really like your reasoning about Bel. I feel like that makes a lot of sense. It's hard for me to think of another one. Maybe Ember. I'll say Ember.
You're cheating. Yeah. He gnaws his face off. Maybe that's probably like a tag team kind of thing. So,
couldn't do it without Ember.
You couldn't do it without Ember. Okay, so we get back to Porter. He goes back into his ship that he's been running around, which he calls the Torment, which I thought was hilarious. And then he spends the next few days kind of restoring the EX droid, putting it back together. And I love this analogy. It says, regardless, Porter liked old machines like this. This was a certain satisfaction to be found in their simplicity, built to do one job and do it well, made it survive whatever the galaxy could throw at it, a bit like Porter himself. I love that he's drawn the analogy to that droid as kind of a one-trick pony, and that's survival. He does it a little bit later, too. I forget where it is. I think I had it written down here, but he does another kind of analogy as well. So, but yeah, he brings the droid back online. This droid is called EXOG, which was his original name, which I assume was EX Original Gangster. But Porter decides to call it EX1. And then he tells the droid to deliver this message to Coruscant. He says, I need you to find a Jedi named Elzar Mann. He'll be the Jedi temple on Coruscant. I want you to deliver an urgent message. And the reason why he's targeting Elzar, and the reason why earlier he said he was inspired by Elzar, is that Elzar had used some of the tech, and we saw this in Shadows of Starlight. He came up with this idea of using this old tech to kind of communicate and send a message, and Porter received that message, and that's why that's kind of who he wants to kind of relay the rest of his messages back to Coruscant. He sends off the droid, and Porter at this point's like, I don't even know what to do with myself, right? I don't know what I should do right now. And then suddenly he picks up one of the messages from Rhil that was because he had sliced the console on that ship. And it was a message that says, my name is Rhil Dairo. I'm a prisoner of the Nihil. Marchion Ro and his followers are holding me against my will on Hetzal and forcing me to broadcast their lies and propaganda. And he figures at that point, like, this has to be the will of the Force. There can't be any other explanation. This is what I was called to do now. And so he decides that he's going to take off to Hetzal and meet up with Rhil. And he's confident that that droid is now taken off. The sad thing is, and we'll cover this when we get to the Nihil, it's intercepted. Like the droid, that poor EX droid gets intercepted by, was it Shrike or was it the Kahaf? It was Shrike, I think, who intercepted it.
Yeah, I believe it was Shrike.
Who intercepts it, or maybe it was Vice. I forget now. It doesn't matter. We'll cover it later, but it's sad because it never even makes it. Like they capture it and destroy it almost immediately. And so he doesn't know this until later on, and he'll find out here in a little bit. All right, we're going to get to the big moment where they all kind of come together, but anything else you want to add on that one?
Well, just the adaptability of Porter, because I feel like that's something that really stands out about his character, and we see that a lot in these chapters of, and it probably is just the fact that he's a lot farther along in his spiritual journey than Avar is, which is totally fair. But he just, when he's in a bad situation, he just seems very willing to be able to think of an idea or at least something to try or something to do. And he just kind of goes with it. And he doesn't seem to be having so much turmoil about it.
Mm.
It sounds like he is having a little bit of uneasiness about, like, am I going to die on this side of the occlusion zone? But he at least believes in his efforts that he's making to try to resolve the situation. And so I feel like that just says a lot about where this character's at in terms of his own confidence in himself.
Yeah. And some of it, I think, is just his age, right? The veteran that he is, and how he's lived this 200-year life. He's learned a lot of things about himself and how to survive. I mean, he's the quintessential survivor at this point. So you're not wrong. Yeah, very adaptable to just about anything that's being thrown at him. And he got thrown through the ringer throughout phase 1 and now phase 2 or phase 3 as well. We'll see what happens in Blade. I have a feeling we're going to get more of that kind of characteristic and behavior in that comic series. Okay, so Avar, this is now chapter 5. Again, all the stories kind of come together. Avar and goes up to meet Rhil and Meglar. This is like on the cusp of them taking off in the cacophony. And, she leaves KC-78. She leaves Bellin behind. And when they meet up, Meglar hands over a bag. And inside that bag is the EX-1 droid that had been smashed. I think Marchion Ro smashed it or something. And at one point, Meglar was there after everybody had left. They just, left that droid there in parts. And he scooped it all up, put it in a bag. And he hands it over to Avar Kriss. And he gives it to her and says that it was created by Porter Engle. And for her, that's the first time she's thinking, holy bananas, Porter Engle, right? Like, he's alive, he's here, kind of thing. Little does she know she's about to meet up with him. And then after he hands over the bag, Meglar is then basically sniped in the head. He's shot in the head and falls over dead. And that's the end of Meglar, so who cares? If you listen to the audiobook, the voice that is used for him, it's like really slow and kind of dumb sounding. And that was, I think I've talked about this. I don't want to go, but it just ruined it. And now I can't get that voice out of my head. So, I mean, I love Mark Thompson, but sometimes his voices are like, that's not how, I don't want to hear it because that's not how I envisioned it.
Yeah, it can be jarring when it goes against what you pictured. I felt that way about Axel Greylark, which it's nothing about the voice actor's performance that's wrong with it. It was different than what I thought.
It's a shock to the system at times.
Yeah.
Depending on how much your headcanon has gone and created a voice for you. And then suddenly you realize that Vice is there. Like, she intercepted that communication about earlier that we talked about with Rel, and she knows that they're going to be here. And, again, the entire time, excuse me, the Nihil are trying to capture Jedi as much as they can, because Marchion Ro wants him captured for nefarious reasons, as we've already seen. And so Vice is here, and she wants to capture Avar Kriss. She's familiar with who Avar Kriss is. She knows what kind of a Jedi she is. And, it's not Porter Engle, but at least it's a Jedi, and it's going to look, favorable in Marchion Ro's eyes. And then their Petrick as well. So this is the little Talpini that we talked about at the very beginning is here. He shows up. And so, Petrick and Rhil are suddenly kind of having their little, I don't know, mud wrestling match going on over on the side. And then you get into this Avar Kriss versus General Vice, and we're not going to do it justice. You need to read this chapter. It's really great. The battle between them two, her using the Beskar armor. You see Avar kind of doing what she does really well. And you almost get the sense from Vice that maybe she might have bitten too much here, like taken on too much. I really feel like Avar Kriss had this battle played out even further, and the reinforcements for Vice didn't show up, because eventually all these reinforcements on Nihil show up, and they're kind of surrounding her. They've got nets. It's just a matter of time. And Avar can see the writing on the wall, but I mean, she headbutts her at one point. She holds her own throughout the entire fight. And excuse me. Unfortunately, because the Nihil show up, they're about to win. But I think, again, I would have put my money on Avar Kriss finally taking down Vice. I know it's trivial, but I just want to know your thoughts. Did you get that sense as you were reading?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like Vice's arrogance got the best of her, and she seems to think that she can best any Jedi, and that's just not the case. I mean, it sounds like she's been successful against a few in the past, but I mean, at the end of the day, I know she's very skilled with warfare and things like that, but I just don't feel like she has the same fighting training that a Jedi has. So there are going to be Jedi that are more powerful than her, and I don't think she's honest with herself about that.
Yeah. I chalk it up to just Avar Kriss being special in a lot of ways, and why she's looked upon as kind of that hero.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, she's definitely earned the title that she has.
Right. Yeah, I mean, she's a Jedi killer. I'm talking about Vice now, Jedi killer. She earned that title. She's got there in the comic book. There's that one moment where she has her General Grievous moment, and she opens up her shawl here or whatever it is, and she's got lightsabers hanging off of them. So she's killed some, but I mean, we don't know. They weren't all Porter Engles. They probably weren't all Avar Krisses, but Avar Kriss is just kind of cut differently. She is a different kind of a Jedi altogether. Nonetheless, they're in the middle of their fight. Things don't look like they're going to go well, and then suddenly we hear like this massive sound overhead. And, Vice is immediately thinking, I didn't call for reinforcements. And Avar Kriss is thinking, oh, there's even more reinforcements showing up. And a ship suddenly just lands right there where they're fighting. Avar Kriss is able to kind of jump back. She pulls Rhil out of the way. There's a massive explosion when the ship lands, and there's a crater that's created, and it kills a ton of the Nihil. I mean, it's like the ultimate bomb. And then after all that's over, they look up, and there's Porter Engle doing his best Mary Poppins impression, just slowly floating down, right? It was Porter Engle that sent the torment down into the ground and kind of really turned the tide at that point. So much that Vice realizes that it's Porter Engle, but it's now Porter Engle and Avar Kriss. And so she wants no part of this. And so she decides to turn tail. She takes off. And then, Rhil, Avar Kriss, and Porter Engle, they all leave and they head back to the ship where Belen is.
And Avar, when she sees that it's Porter, she is just filled with so much relief. I think this is probably the first time that she's really been this cheered up, is when she actually sees another fellow Jedi, and she has someone who's kind of on her same playing field that she can work with now. Like, just the sight of Porter, it just completely lifts her spirits in a whole new way.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely does. And there's moments in there where they're kind of talking about it, and you can tell that definitely is how it's, what she's feeling now that Porter Engle's around. Avar's got some guilt, I think, as well. I think it's Porter. He says, he's trying to tell her, look, he sees the guilt that's on her. He's like, hey, you survived in a hostile environment. You help people. That's no small feat, Avar. You cannot discount small gestures that change people's lives. After a while, they start to add up. You made a difference whether you see it or not. And so he's almost kind of coming at this from a different approach than Belen was saying, in that even though you feel like you weren't doing the big things, you still did do something. You still did the small things. And that's, definitely a win in that regard. And then Porter kind of gives him all the background. He's using the EX droid to kind of send a signal out there. He talks about Elzar's message being received. That, of course, gives her life again, knowing that Elzar is still out there. And then he said that he gave the message to KC. And he mentions that he has that message that he intercepted from Elzar Mann. And so he lets her listen to it, right? He gives the message to her and listens to it. And she listens to it 3 times, which I have questions about why she did that.
Because
why
she
he
misses
did that. Why did
him.
So you said though Porter, you felt like Porter knew about the relationship though, right? I think we may have talked about this offline at some point, but
I think he must, because I mean, well, first of all, do you think Porter listened to it? Because that's
kind of creepy, but no.
Oh, okay. Because I was like, did Porter listen to this? Because how else would he have known it was meant for Avar if he didn't listen to it?
True. Well, I guess he would have. No, you're right. I think he did listen to it. I was misunderstanding the question. I think he definitely listened to it. I think if I had heard that message, this is where I question, like, maybe he felt like she needed this, or he could sense that she needed something, that maybe it wasn't enough for Porter. Maybe he knows just how close they are. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think it's a bad thing. We'll see. I think it could be a bad thing.
To me, they seem, for him to be like, I think you need to listen to this. And then she probably like goes off by herself for a very long time to listen to this 3 times. And then she comes back and she's obviously been crying. I mean, that's just putting 2 and 2 together, that obviously these people are not just friends.
Yeah.
That would be my thought. So I don't know. I kind of think Porter might at least have like a suspicion. He might not know the full story, but I think he probably knows something is going on.
If nothing else, I mean, he's aware of the Firebrand and them growing up together and just how close. I mean, all the Jedi were really, they're all really conscious of the fact that these 3 were kind of inseparable growing up. And so he may just be coming at it from, that perspective, as innocent as that may sound. But I know, to your point, later on in chapter 55, there's a quote, there's a line in here where she's talking about that message. And she says, she felt as if a weight had been lifted, as if a dam had broken, and the sudden release of pressure was palpable. She felt at peace. And so all I'm saying is, at some point, if these 2 go scorched earth or scorched galaxy and start burning everything down and killing everybody because they've turned to the dark side because of their connections, and they're going down the dark side path because of their love, I think I'm gonna have to come back and blame Porter Engle, because I think this was the one of the first moments where this allowed it to happen. It's kind of a joke, but it's not. Okay, so they tell Porter the plan. The plan is to, again, hijack the cacophony, take it by force. And Avar wants to go through with this, but suddenly her tune has changed. Like, it even says it in the book. She says that now she's doing this for Elzar, right? She said that she had come back to herself. She had to dig deep and find the old Avar again, set her free. She had to accept that all her feelings had come to terms with everything that had happened before. She had to do it for herself, and she had to do it for Elzar. Again, I don't know. It's just the attachments. It seems very dangerous, very red flag. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, herself and Elzar. I mean, there should be more taken into consideration than just
like
yourself,
the Republic,
right? Or just like all those innocent people. Yeah, even the Jedi Order, like even other Jedi, but just herself and Elzar. That does not sound like a good foundation to make a decision on.
Yep, I'm with you. They're thinking about themselves, so that little selflessness is kind of starting to slip away there, just a little bit. There's a great moment.
As they get more desperate, they get more selfish.
True.
That seems like something that Elzar and Avar both do.
I think that is a astute observation, and in line with what we, as at least humans, I think we can relate to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for that to happen, but the 2 of them have been in training all of their lives to not do stuff like that. So. Yeah. Not the best.
There's a great moment. We don't have time to get into it, but there's a great moment where Rhil decides that he's going to stay behind. Like, he has an opportunity to take off and leave as well, but he actually wants to, I'm sorry, Rhil, I was thinking about Bellin. Rhil wants to stay behind. Well, they both stay behind. Yeah. The passage that Rhil is talking to her about, that she wants to stay there, even though she'd been trying to get out of there, right? She's now inspired by everything that's been going on. But, she's been inspired by Bellin of people as well, sticking with Avar the entire time. Like that change. Bellin, has inspired Avar. He's also inspired Rhil. And now there's more that those two need to do. And she's, wants to stay back there. Again, I don't know what she's going to do as a journalist, but people adapt.
I mean, I think
change.
continue to do her broadcast is kind of the impression that I got.
Oh, you think she's going to stay with Ro and still do that?
Well, not stay with Ro, but maybe like
Okay.
do like other types of hidden broadcasts maybe. I think that was just a assumption that I made, but I
I can
mean,
see that.
because that would seem like continuing to use her skills for the greater good would be some kind of a, like a resistance radio station or something.
Yep. Yeah,
A
exactly.
coded
Right.
broadcast. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's got to, unless they can get through the storm wall, at least until they get through the storm wall, there's got to, having her on the inside with a way to send communications. Yeah, you're right. There's probably an opportunity there that she can take advantage of or expand upon to get through the storm wall, or at least maybe even rally people internally, cause a resistance or rebellion uprising of sorts that they might need later down the road. But yeah, I wouldn't expect her to suddenly pick up a blaster and start, going around shooting people.
Yeah. Well, and I was just really impressed with her decision to stay because I feel like throughout this whole book, we've seen her end up in horrible situations that are very scary. She recognizes that they're scary. She doesn't really have a lot of training or skills going for her, but she doesn't let her fear of the situation stop her. And she
Mm-hmm.
kind of takes that tragedy that she witnessed at the beginning of the story and actually it just doesn't stop moving after that. Like she continues to push forward, push past the fear and all of the obstacles in her way and decides to do the hard thing, which she feels like, even though it's the hard thing, because she feels like she can still contribute, she's still willing to do that anyway.
Yep. Yep. Nicholas chimed in, says, I agreed, huge red flags between them both. They feel like a toxic couple that have gotten together and broken up a million different times.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is
Can
like me
see
and
that.
Jenny Sandoval in 11th grade all over again. I'm just telling you, it's like,
Oh my
not good.
God.
Yeah. The codependency, and all joking aside, like there's some codependency crap that's happening between these two. And I think that's again where I think it's the wheels are going to start falling off.
Yeah.
Sam Govin just chimed in, says, I was excited for phase 3, almost as excited as you guys are to cover it. Keep up the great work. Thanks, Sam, for chiming in there. All right, we're almost done here. So Avar says her goodbyes to Rhil and Bellin, and they talk about the plan. And the plan is they're going to take one of these grain silos, fill it with explosives, and then they're going to send it out, blow a hole in the side of the cacophony. And then Avar and Porter are going to make a spacewalk essentially without any gear on, any real gear, across and get into there. And once they get into the ship, the idea is that they'll then take over the cacophony and they've got the path drive now. So little different than the plan now that Melgar's dead, and certainly way more dangerous to do this. So we get to Porter. He's readying the bomb at this point. Shrike comes up. They kind of intercept with her. They get real close. And immediately Shrike is like freaking out. This is not covered necessarily in the story, in the chapters that we're on, but just kind of the context. There's something about this that doesn't feel right. She's got a weird sense that these guys aren't answering the calls or trying to hail to them. And the entire time, what's his name? A Bellin ship. They're not answering at all. They actually put on Nihil. This is a very interesting part. They put on the Nihil masks as a way to kind of like help in the spacewalk as best as they can. Although they know it's not going to offer them any real protection. And eventually they open up the cargo doors. Porter shoves the bomb out. They close the cargo doors. The bomb blows up. They open it back up, and now they got to make the walk across there, that spacewalk that happens. And by the way, they use the Force. I thought it was kind of cool. They actually use the Force to guide the bomb into the side of the cacophony to kind of blow a hole in that. Let's see. They open up the hatch. They're only a few meters at this point. Porter nails it immediately. Like he gets right through the hole, no problem, goes to the door like nothing. And then there's again, another, we're not going to do it justice, but it's a very stressful moment when you're reading about Avar, how much she's struggling, not only, with the fact that she's not connected to the Force the way she should be, but, the explosion has kind of rocked her as well. The anxiety of just jumping out into space, not being protected. And she's struggling the entire time. Her lungs are burning up, right? All this fear is kind of seeping in. And then Casey's with her as well, by the way. I should mention that too. He's kind of using his little thrusters and flying into in the well. But she finally makes her way across, gets into where the hole is, but then the door won't open up. And I'm like, good Lord, I was stressed out because now the door won't open up. Porter got through, must have gotten jammed when he went through or whatever it was. But meanwhile, three of the 5 Nihil that were Shrike on the Cacophony, they've taken off. Like they realize that the Jedi have boarded and they just bailed. They're like, we're done here. We don't want it. They jump into their escape pods. And so you got Shrike now in the Cacophony with a problem that the Nihil are starting to leave. They don't like this idea that two Jedi are attacking them, which works in their favor here in just a little bit. And Shrike is furious that everybody is just leaving. And so she decides to call General Weiss and report that now that there were 2 Jedi in there. She mentioned there's 2 Jedi. And Weiss says, she says, send her our coordinates and trigger the contingency measures, blow the path drive. We're not going to allow it to fall into the Jedi hands on my watch. These few chapters here are like feverish pitch. Like it's really that traditional Star Wars kind of back and forth, jumping around from chapter to chapter. It really builds up a lot of hype, anxiety, and momentum. So I really did enjoy all of these next chapters and how well they were put together.
Yeah, a lot of
Anything you want to
tension
add on that?
here. It's just the tension is planned out very well, like you were saying. Just that process of them having to first they've got to come up with plan B. Okay, plan B is really dangerous. Okay, now we've got to jump through this thing. Like it was just like one step after another. You're just like, are they going to pull this off? I mean, you get a good sense that they're going to, but it's just kind of like, how are they going to make it work?
Yep. They eventually start making their way. They're cutting through all the Nihil forces. And there's a funny moment in there where Porter's like really not impressed with the number of forces that are still there. And Avar is like, I'm okay with this. Like, we don't need any more. But it was kind of cool to see that they were fighting
Yeah, like why are
back
you
to back.
complaining?
Yeah, like you're complaining. But if you know Porter Engle from the Blade comic, then you know why he's complaining. Like, that was, of course, in his prime, and he was just taking on armies of people. So he's something he's very well used to. But yeah, the idea that these two, like you have Avar Kriss and Porter Engle back to back, and they're, whirling their lightsabers and deflecting bolts back at them, and they're just killing Nihil left and right. Again, this is where I feel like they were just in pure survival mode. They weren't really thinking about trying to save lives or, preserve life in any way at this point. And then eventually the Weiss shows up on her ship, which is the Foregone Catastrophe, which is a crazy name, but Foregone Catastrophe shows up. And Weiss is interesting. Like, she doesn't care if, any of the Nihil lived. And I really question where her true allegiance is. And this may play out a little bit later, which I won't get into now, but she starts attacking. Like, she realizes that, they're on that ship. And so she decides that she's just going to bombard the Cacophony, like Shrike ship. Shrike had called her for help, and she decides, well, I'm here. I really don't care about Shrike, even though, at one point I maybe saw her as like my protege, or she's kind of cut the same way I am. There's almost a little bit of admiration there, but she's like, yeah, whatever. I'm going to just start blowing them up. And so they start, just bombarding the Cacophony. I want to throw this one little piece in there as well. It's very slight, very quick line in there. She mentions talking about how Shrike had the 4-7 lightsaber nullifier, and that it had been destroyed. Which I thought was interesting because that was a weapon that showed up again in the Rising Storm. We didn't really see it again for a while. It was mentioned, I think, in one of the comics, and then we saw it at play in Shadows of the Sith, Shadows of Starlight. Sorry, in Shadows of Starlight, not Shadows of Sith. A lot of shadows, Trail of Shadows, Shadows of Sith, Shadow of Starlight. But yeah, she says that Shrike it destroyed it, and so as an aside, I actually went on. So Kevin Scott had something on his Instagram this morning. It said, "Ask me anything." I asked him, "Are we ever going to see the 4-7 nullifier again?" So when he comes back to that, we'll probably post a result. Maybe if he answers that, I don't know if he will. If he can't even answer it, but the idea of that 4-7 nullifier was just a really cool concept, because I thought that, coupled with the Nameless, you've really taken everything away from the Jedi that make them the Jedi, outside of the the material things or the non-material things like heart and spirit and determination and all that. But you've taken away their ability to wield lightsabers, and you've taken the Force away. What do they have left? The idea that it's now gone, maybe, possibly forever, it kind of sucks for me. But I don't know. Any thoughts around the 4/7 nullifier and really not making as much of maybe an impact that we were kind of hinted at being in the Rising Storm?
I'm okay with it. I felt like it was just too much. I feel like the nameless plus the nullifier, no. I feel like just one is good enough for me, so I'm fine with it if it's gone.
Okay, that's
I
fair.
kind of feel like it's not gone. I feel like we will see it again for them to have made such a big deal about it, but I'm good
Yeah,
with just the nameless. I think that's enough for me to worry about.
I think it was feeding into my headcanon of, okay, now that the Jedi really have nothing, then the only people left are the non-Force users, just, to stand up against the Nihil and do something different. But that was really all. Okay, so Shrike is now getting bombarded by, she's got Porter Engle and Avar Kriss coming up to the bridge where she's at. Her people have already left her. And on top of that, now she has her buddy, bombarding their little ship. And I almost feel I almost kind of felt bad for her at in this one moment here, because she says, she's talking to herself. She says, "How did this happen? It had all happened so quick. One minute she was making plans, heading to her next raid, her crew obedient and at her side. The next, her ship was being stormed by Jedi and attacked by the general. So she had come. So she says, so she's come for me after all." Shrike felt her resolve whittling. This was it. This was what the end looked like. She played the game and she had lost. She should have been stronger, more determined, but now Vice was out there to destroy her for her failures. The Jedi would be here at any moment, and her crew had abandoned her to her fate. She grinned. Bryn was right. She really wasn't like Vice, not in the end. It was a small moment there, but I actually did feel bad for her that this suddenly happened. I mean, I really could care less one way or the other, but it's just interesting that she was reflecting on all of that.
I felt like she got what she deserved. I didn't feel bad for
Okay,
her.
fair enough.
She got what was coming.
I think he was trying to make us sympathize with her, but maybe it didn't really work.
She's already done too many horrible things. It was too late for me to sympathize.
Yeah, you know what? Screw her. I'm glad she died. So she orders the final evacuation, and then Avar is, almost at the bridge, and she has this moment where she says, I promise to make you proud, Maru. Perhaps this is that moment. Perhaps after this, I'll be able to look myself in the eye again, perhaps." And so she, again, just more callbacks to Maru and some of that emotional guilt and weight that she's carrying since she kind of left him to die on Starlight Beacon. And then she gets to the bridge, doesn't think that there's anybody there. Suddenly Shrike jumps out, and they kind of get into this, they get into a fight. Again, we're not going to do the battles justice, but in the end, Avar Kriss not only cuts her hand off, which she did with Lorna D. Like, this is now, this is kind of good for Star Wars, right? Amputations, but she cuts her arm off and she breaks her knee, and leaves her there, and then stabs her in the chest, I think, with a lightsaber as well. So I think Shrike is pretty much down, although she does live. Later on when they finally meet up with Bell, she tells Bell that, hey, Shrike's on here, send some medical attention. So her story's not over. So, I mean, I said she dies. She technically doesn't die, but she's now going to be in Republic captivity.
Yeah. I mean, kind of disappointing, but maybe there's still time for her to reflect some more.
Yeah. Think about your sins of the past. Okay, so Avar then tells, Shrike then tells Avar that basically she set the cacophony to accelerate towards the storm wall, and the path drives are offline. So in other words, she's basically sent this thing to explode on impact. She relays that to Porter, and then Porter decides that he's going to have to do something about this, right? He says that he needs to take the fight to Vice, and he says that basically this is now her mission, that this was meant for you, Avar, to kind of pick this up. And again, he goes into this long speech. I've got it. I don't want to say it because we're really short on time at this point, but it's just another like sign of like him finally saying, this is it. This is my last thing. I'm going to go down with a ship, so to speak. It's all you now. You are the future of the Jedi, whereas maybe I was once at some point.
He's kind of passing the torch.
Yeah. Yeah. And he says, you can do this, Avar. I believe in you. And then he said, may the Force be with you. And then he left and goes on to do it. And then at that point, she calls KC, and they get started on the plan to at least put the EX droid, put the memory into the cacophony, right? So now that they have this, they have the memory of the EX droid, they have the programming on how to traverse hyperspace, the way the EX droid is. And again, this is Star Wars science, but the thought is they can put that memory chip in the cacophony, and now it's not running on the hyperspace technology, so to speak, that would blow up if it hit the storm wall. It would be using the EX droid technology, and so that would allow them to pass through the storm wall safely. So that's KC's job now. He's got to figure out a way to get that into the hyperdrive or into the programming of the cacophony in order for all of this to work. So Porter decides that now he's got to make his way up to Vice's ship. He finds a driller ship, which was used before. I was trying to find a picture of him. I couldn't find one. And he basically gets into this driller ship, goes through the back, goes out the back of the cacophony, goes up through the nose of Vice's ship, and then implants himself so far deep into the roof of the ship. That's how far he went into. And not only did he do that, he did some massive damage with these driller ships to the point where he's almost split the ship in half. And the only thing keeping this ship together is the fact that this the driller ship that he's flying in is kind of wedged in between it. Right. This plays out a little bit later, but yeah, I mean, it's I don't know if it was really
Very
the best plan, but I guess
dramatic.
it was the only plan. Yeah, it's very dramatic in what he does.
Just drives it into the ship.
Yep. And then he just gets out like, well, I can't move. I can't go any further. So he just jumps out and, walks
He
it out.
made it work, I guess.
Yep. And then he is confronted by Vice. And there's a moment there where she says, Porter Engle, I thought you might have fled just like your sister did. Ouch. But here you are, and once again, you've ruined everything. Because, I mean, Vice knows at this point, like, this ship is not going to last very much longer. Like, the damage he did is so significant. And, the ship's coming apart everywhere. It says Porter's side. It looked as though it looked as if he'd been right when he told Avar all along that he was the past after all. And then she says, a last dance? He says, a last dance as he gets his lightsaber ready. And the Vice screams in wild rage, and so they charge. And so they go right back at it, and they have kind of their final little battle. Meanwhile, back over to Avar Kriss and KC, they put the memory chip into the Navi computer. Shrike is laughing because she thinks that they're going to die. She's just sitting there laying there bleeding out. She really can't do much at all but just watch what's happening. And then Avar suddenly, here, I want your thoughts on this. So Avar she tells KC to punch it, right? We get the infamous starting up of the Millennium Falcon and then it winding down. It doesn't work right when she thinks it's going to. But I have a question about whether or not she somehow used the Force to get the hyperdrive to make it through the storm wall, and it not being the memory chip that KC. Now, on one hand, I want KC to have been kind of the hero as we would expect, right? But let me just read this, and I want your thoughts on this.
Okay.
So Casey, mind you, he's messing with the wires. It says her hands moved as if they were own volition, hovering above the controls. Right. So she's channeling the Force. Her eyes are closed, and her hands are moving over the controls. Right. KC-78 was still frantically tweaking with the wiring beneath the console. She waited, breathless, and waited, and then the discordant song seemed to swell all around her. Now she pushed the lever to engage the hyperdrive. Shrike screamed, her earlier nonchalance replaced by sudden fear. Avar opened her eyes, the galaxy stretched, light filled her vision. So I don't know, like before it was KC that was sending them into hyperspace, right? But somehow she was doing something on the controls and then pushed the button to go into hyperspace. So was it Avar Kriss that took him through the storm wall? Was it KC? Was it some combination thereof? What am I missing here? It was kind of nebulous for me.
Yeah, well, and I think you're probably not alone in that. Because, okay, the way that I interpreted it, I also felt like it could have been taken different ways. But what I thought was happening was Casey's messing with the controls, trying to fix everything. And then Avar kind of took a blind leap of faith and was like, okay, it's now or never. I'm doing it. Like, I hope you've got it fixed. Because I think it was like, Casey was like doing the best that they could, but we don't know if it's going to work or not. So I kind of felt like it was Avar taking a leap of like, okay, well, we're just going to try this now because it's got to work now or we're running out of time.
Yeah, they were out of time. They were out of time at that point.
And then thank God it just so happened to work
Mm,
and Casey got it just in the nick of time. That's kind of what I thought, but I could see how you could take it as also like, is Avar actually doing something here other than just taking a leap of faith?
yeah. I like your version better, honestly. It just wasn't as clear cut. And I read that a few times over and over again, trying to think like, what am I missing here? Why is this not as clear? And maybe that wasn't the intent, is to kind of make you wonder.
I felt like it was because it wasn't just because the leap of faith I feel like was also a key part of why it worked. I feel like if Avar hadn't connected with the Force and been ready to take the leap of faith, then they might have run out of time and then not gotten through, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Well, more on them in just one second. We swing back over to Porter Engle, and this is where he kind of bows out at this point, no pun intended. But you know, him and Vice are battling as they always had been for forever. The ship's kind of being torn apart all around them. Porter, as he's fighting, is starting to reflect on his life and all the years that he spent fighting Vice. He starts thinking about what he wants. Like he really wishes that he could have spent more time on Coruscant. He wishes that he could have seen Yoda again. He wanted to walk the levels of Coruscant, the lower levels, and do some shopping. And then he wanted to see, you know, Bell and Ember and Adira Strokes. So he's having this kind of like, this is your life moment because he feels like this is really the end. But he does say that he's going to make Vice pay. Again, this keeps coming up in this in the High Republic, but he wants to make her pay for what she did to Barash. Vice has some couple words with him here at the very end as well. There's some really great moments in there. We don't have time to read those now. But she jumps and lunges at Porter Engle with her blade, and she buries it into his shoulder. He's got blood pouring out. He's starting to feel the blood. He's getting woozy. So she really got him pretty good with that hit. And then as if that wasn't enough, the ship is breaking apart, and the part that he's standing on suddenly like breaks up. He falls over, catches himself, and he's now standing. When he comes up, he realizes he's kind of standing almost on an island of the floor all by himself. He's completely detached from the ship, and he's below where Vice is still on, although she is on the same ship and it is still falling apart. And the only thing that's keeping Porter Engle from drifting off into space are the shields themselves. The shields are keeping all the pieces in place, but if the shields go out, that's it. He's just drifting off into space, you know, with nothing on, and that's his death. And I just want to give you his last moments there. And again, he's kind of feeling all the blood there and all that, but it says beneath him was nothing but the stark void of space, now held at a bay by the last stuttering remnants of the vessel's shields. Soon it would swallow him up. There was nowhere to go, so this was it. Go well, Avar. He glanced up. Vice was staring down at him from the broken floor above, now out of reach. Goodbye, Porter Engle. He watched blinking blood and sweat from his eye as she turned and ran. And just quickly, this moment was for me very reminiscent of Indiana Jones and Belloc, when Belloc throws Indy into the Chamber of Souls and says, you know, bon voyage or whatever. He says, goodbye, Indiana Jones kind of thing. But it was like this, it was kind of that same kind of, you know, it was almost like they were always, you know, after each other this entire time. They had an entire life together of constantly trying to one up each other. And it seems like she does have the upper hand here, and he really does have nothing. And that's how it ends for Porter Engle. Like, we don't know if he survived. Later on, like I said, Avar says, you know, if anybody could survive, it was him. But I guess, what are your thoughts? Do you think he made it out of here?
I think 100%. I think for me, there's not even a doubt that he made it out of there because he's doing all this reflecting about the end of his life and stuff. But to me, that just seemed more reflective of that's just the part of his life that he's in, is he's kind of preparing for the end. But this particular fight, I don't think is the end. We don't
Okay.
see him die. We don't see Vice
no
finish
body.
him off. Yeah. I mean, there's characters that have come back from way worse. So I think he's going to somehow get out of the situation, nurse himself back to health, and then we'll see him again in another book.
Okay. And I'm with you. Like, the fact that there is no body and it is Porter Engle, he's like the cockroach of the Jedi. He just can't seem to go down. So I can see where he would still live on.
A cockroach in a really cool way.
Yeah, not like in the Darth Maul cockroach kind of way, but in the good way.
Yeah.
All right, we go back to Avar Kriss. She made it through the storm wall, and suddenly she's being hailed by a Republic ship, and the voice is Bel Zettifar. So we'll get into how they got there, but they are the ones that see her on the other side coming out of the storm wall. and they kind of say, hey, what's up? And then she decides that they need to go to Coruscant immediately. She tells them that Mela Shrike is on, and then again that she needs medical support. The very last chapter is us back at the temple, and immediately when she gets to the temple, she's already looking for Elzar Mann, right? Which is already kind of a problem, like we've talked about.
She admitted that's what she did it for, was for Elzar.
She did it for Elzar.
Yeah.
And she's running around. Everybody's looking at her. They're super happy to see her. You know, she vows to herself that she's going to come back at some point. She's going to go back for Bellin, and she's going to go back for Rhil, right? I think that's going to, I talked about who's going to save them. It's probably going to be her. I don't know where that's in the comic or in one of the books. And then she walks around the Chamber of Council, and she's surrounded by all the Jedi that are there, and they're all happy to see her. I've got some pictures up that I'll just kind of throw up while I'm doing this. But she looked around face to face. Rye, Yoda, Laru, Adampo, Keaton, Adali Lee, Soleil, Terry, Oppo, everybody, all the names of folks that are there, including Arkoff, Indira, Bel Buryaga, and Yoda. So many familiar, welcoming faces. And then suddenly she can hear her song again. Like and you can take this a couple different ways, right? You could say that she can hear her song again because she's back on Coruscant. She's back in the Jedi Temple. Things are better. She doesn't have all the stressors. But for me, the only thing that's changed really is now she's within the presence of Elzar Mann. Like, it never said that she felt it when she came into the solar system. She didn't feel it when she came into Coruscant. Not really when she came into the chamber, but it's only when she goes into the council chamber itself, where Elzar Mann is, along with all the other Jedi, that suddenly she hears a song again. And it just makes me wonder, is that song that she feels the Force, but somehow derived because of her love and her affection and her attachment to Elzar Mann? I guess that's the theory.
That's interesting, because I definitely took it the more positive way, which was that she's back with the Jedi Order. She's back in what she feels like is her place. And so the Song of the Force was in harmony again because of that. Because I guess like what I associated it with is she is starting to realize that she's better off working with people instead of trying to do things on her own. Because in phase 3 so far, well, and at the end of phase 1, we've seen when Avar goes off by herself and tries to handle something by herself, it gets her into trouble. And I mean, she ends up getting separated from people. Bad things happen. It's just not good when she tries to handle things on her own. But when she's working as a team, then that's when amazing things are accomplished. I mean, even just her getting back to Coruscant, getting through the storm wall, she couldn't have done that without Rhil, Porter, and KC. So, I mean, I feel like now that she's starting to actually come to terms with, well, and I still feel like she has a long way to go. I don't think that she's fully learned this lesson yet, but I feel like she's starting to. But she's starting to learn the lesson of, when I'm working with people, when I'm with people, that's when everything's as it should be. And to me, this Song of the Force sounding right again was kind of just like a symbol of that realization.
Okay. Yeah. I like that explanation. I think I'll stick with the more cynical side. That way we can say we were right when one of us is right.
Yeah, you can be cynical if you want.
I just feel, I'm more of the camp where she felt like she needed to find her, like, she was trying to find who she was, trying to connect with the Force, and it's only because of Elzar Mann that all that happens. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's that could be a recipe for disaster later down the road, but one of us is right, I'm sure, or some combination thereof. But they see each other, and she finally says that she was home, not the chamber, not the temple, not Coruscant, but she was home because Elzar, right? Elzar is her home. And again, that's another.
Yeah, that doesn't really help my theory that I just said, but we'll look past that.
Right. Let's just gloss over that real quick here.
Yeah, just ignore that.
Yeah, and she admits to herself that she needs him too. Like, she says that, I need him too, kind of thing. So again, they're getting to this crazy codependent relationship. They've been in a codependent relationship, whether they realize it or not. But it's really starting to kind of rear its ugly head here, and we'll see where that goes. She walks up to Elzar. She tells him, whispers to him, right, because everybody's there. They're about to go through a debrief of what to do next, kind of thing. And she tells him, like, I heard your message. And that gave her strength. And they have Star Wars hand sex at that point, which means their hands touched. They had the little brief hands touching there.
Oh my God. You gotta love a hand touch.
Yeah, the hand touch. It happens in Star Wars. And then they both kind of turn and they turn their attention now to the hollow that they've brought up, which is basically the galaxy. And it's clearly they can see the large chunk of space now that the Nihil have carved out as part of the occlusion zone. And that's how it ends, right? That's the end of it. So
they're going to come up with a plan now.
yeah, right. That's going to take us into the next book. Although the next books that are coming out, the Valo book, Valo, was it Escape? What is it? Book.
Escape from Valo.
Yeah, Escape from Valo. I forget the other one now too. But those two don't look like they're going to pick up on these threads. I don't know when we're going to get into this one yet. I have to go back and look, and I really haven't looked that far ahead. I know they've released more information about the books, but it might be a little bit before we get back to these characters if they don't come up in the comic book. Where I think 3 issues into the High Republic main title from Marvel Comics, and that really is kind of more focused on Vanessa Rowe, and not Vanessa Rowe, sorry,
Keith
Trennis, right? And well, should I say this because it just came out, right? Did issue 3 just come out? We had the preview. That's why I don't want to say anything.
Issue 3 just came out, so maybe to be
Officially?
on the safe side.
Okay. Well, Lorna D's back in play.
Okay.
And she's captured, which plays into my theory that Lorna D is going to come back and be a good person on the good side. All right.
It's like once you start, you just can't. It's like an avalanche.
Yeah. So if you're not reading the High Republic comics, you have to. It's all of this is just kind of required reading. So all right. So we'll end the show here. I mean, end on that note. Do you want to, at some point, we probably should come back, maybe not in this show. Well, not in this show, maybe in one of the future shows, or we can come back on a special one. But I do want to spend some time at some point talking about potentially what we'd want to see from these characters going forward, what we want to theorize on what could happen. You know, maybe we'll come back after the next 2 books and see if that helps formulate some of that. But definitely before we get to the next adult novel. But your any kind of final thoughts on the first part in these three characters?
Well, I mean, there's still so much more to say about this book, but I feel like even just with these 3 characters alone, just the start that this gets us of getting back into phase 3 and kind of taking the threads that the comic Shadows of Starlight started and carrying it forward. I feel like this book has just done such an amazing job of that.
Yeah, it is a great way to kick off phase 3. And I'm super excited to see how they plan to tie this into what we see for, you know, the Acolyte series that's coming up, and you know what are some of the warning signs that we're going to continue to see, because I think we saw some of them during phase 1, but the warning signs that we're going to continue to see that are kind of the cautionary tales that get us to the point where the Jedi are during the Phantom Menace, because they're very, very different. Their outlook on everything is completely different, and so not only that, but it also like the Guardian protocols, right? And how many of those Guardian protocols were supposed to be temporary, but carried over into the Phantom Menace? There's a reason for that. So it's really cool to kind of see all this starting to form up and take shape. So I think this book does a really good job of kicking us off in that direction. All right, last thing before we go. We had a lot of people that joined us on the live show. Thank you guys for everybody for coming out to the live stream again. And I'm sorry, this was a little bit longer, and it's probably going to be the longer of the 3. I don't expect the second one to be as long, and certainly by the time we get to the Nihil, that's going to be a shorter one because they're not really in the book that much, and we at that point will have talked about a lot of it. So, but thank you again for everyone that was out here tonight, especially for all the hardcores that stuck around for over 2 hours now. But Lauren, I know you were taking names. What shout outs do you have?
Yes, thank y'all for joining us. Music Train, Sky, My Star Wars Guys, 80s Kid from the 90s, One Up vs CPU, Matt, Skywalker's Academy, Lego Cat, Nicholas, and Sam. Thanks, y'all.
Awesome. Yes, thank you guys for doing that. Don't forget, we've got the shows coming up here. We've got a couple shows coming up this weekend. And then we're going to come back, and we've got the next 3 characters. So we've got Bell, Buryaga, and Elzar Mann. That'll be Lauren and I here on a week from today, so next Thursday, and we'll break those down, and then we'll wrap up the 3rd episode with Markion Rowe, Gira Starros, and then just kind of the Nihil and some of the other baddies and some of the stuff that kind of happens in between that. We might bring in some of those final questions and theory questions into that show, depending on what that looks like in terms of a timeline. If not, we'll bring that up here later in a future episode. So. All right. I guess that's it. Any final words? Any final thoughts before we go?
I think we covered everything.
We covered everything. All right, guys.
Yeah,
We'll see you
I think
here.
we got it.
In about a week. Thanks.
You're still listening? Wow. That's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.